Good afternoon. I am Bhadelia. I'm an infectious diseases physician, and I'm the director of Boston University's Center on Emerging Infectious Diseases. Apropos to today, I'm the director of the Biothreats Emergence Analysis and Communications Network, or Beacon, which we are about to launch today. Beacon is based at CEID and operated in collaboration with the Hariri Institute and HealthMap of Boston Children's Hospital. We are so delighted after over a year of work to share this launch with you, to share the platform with you, partly because this seems like the right time to share a global open source resource that tells us about incoming infectious diseases threats. What Beacon will do will bridge gaps in outbreak reporting, and it will hasten global responses to new biological threats. And we are honored to be joined today by an incredible group of speakers and discussants that will help us celebrate the launch of this beta version of Beacon. So what is Beacon? Beacon is a free, open source, informal surveillance program designed to revolutionize global biothreat surveillance and response. It leverages artificial intelligence and large language models, and more critically, a human global network of subject matter experts that are currently based in 4 different continents. It collects, analyzes, and disseminates information on emerging infectious diseases affecting humans, animals, and the environment. We'll share a bit more about the technical aspects of Beacon in a little bit. We'll give you a demo. But I wanted to share the values and why we think Beacon is so important in this moment. Beacon is built on the principle of fair, open, transparent exchange of available data. Like any early warning systems for fires or hurricanes, Beacon's job is to analyze and broadcast the rise of new threats. It's globe spanning, it's open source. I'll keep saying that because I think it is one of our best features is that we're free. Near real-time disease alert system that you can keep in your pocket or on your desktop and rely on. We believe that all information like this should be freely available where possible. And this week marks, 250-year anniversary of the Revolutionary War? And I can't help but reflect, if Paul Revere only went to a certain number of homes to say the British were coming, we may not have won that war. It's the same with outbreak information, right? All communities and stakeholders should have access to information about infectious diseases that may affect their futures. We and our funders believe in keeping this platform open source, and the investments made in this platform and related technologies were made with this central commitment, as global response to epidemics can only become faster if we remove barriers to information and provide risk analysis. Second, information alone is not sufficient. We live in a world of data. Context about why a new threat matters, where it should fall in our ranking of concerns, what the known unknowns are equally important for all of us to determine how we prepare and respond. This is why Beacon strives to provide expert commentaries, related resources, and other reference materials so you, the general public, the experts, and clinicians can have a better understanding of the threat. That richer context around new events is what we include in every report that we put on the website. For us to build trust and to address dis and misinformation, we will make time and the investment to explain why a report or an event is important. Third, we're committed to being transparent and apolitical. We are an independent institution. We are based in an academic organization, independent organization based in an academic institution with globally based partnerships. And we're not aligned with any government institutions. If we're able to verify new reports, we post them transparently. Lastly, as 60% of all new human pathogens are zoonoses, as in they originate from animals, Beacon is committed to reporting One Health threats across humans, animals, plants, and toxins. And we're going to expand that coverage over time, as you'll see on the platform. This allows us, as a global community, to have greater foresight about pathogens that could spill over into humans in the future and may affect our food supply and our environment. H5N1. With that, let me get you organized about how today will go. In a little bit, I'm going to hand the mic over to President Emeritus Bob Brown to provide welcoming words. Today is a mix of opening remarks, special remarks, a panel, and the demo. And we'll end the day with a keynote address from Dr. Robert Goldstein, who's the Department of Public Health Commissioner for Massachusetts, and we'll be joined by Secretary Yvonne for Massachusetts Labor. Let me now start by introducing Dr. Brown. Dr. Brown is a distinguished chemical engineer, educator, and served as the president of Boston University from 2005 to 2023. Prior to this appointment, I want to place that's during the COVID pandemic. I just want to let you know his leadership was pretty critical during an infectious diseases emergency. Prior to that appointment at BU, Dr. Brown served as the provost and the Warren K. Lewis Professor of Chemical Engineering at MIT, where he was on faculty from 1979 to 2005. Because we're trying to keep everything on time, let me just say his most important designation for us is that he's the chair of the board for Beacon. Thank you so much. Bob, over to you.
Good afternoon. It's really a pleasure to represent the governing board of Beacon and Boston University today, and to welcome you to the launch of Beacon. I am playing this role because our president, Melissa Gillum, and our university provost, Gloria Waters, both champions of this effort, had to attend a board meeting today. You can imagine what a university board meeting is like right now. This space is a wonderful setting for this event. The Dewan Family Center for Computing and Data Sciences was built to house faculty and programs from across our campus that are focused on advancing machine learning and AI and its applications to all fields. As you will hear, Beacon sits at the nexus of one of the most important applications, human health. The launch of Beacon is an exciting new chapter in our ability to detect the threat of infectious diseases around the world. I know you are here because you agree that this is one of the most important challenges facing us as COVID-19 so horribly exposed. I am not an infectious disease expert, as Nahid has said, as are so many people in this room. I'm an engineer and really an applied mathematician, and happen to be president through the COVID-19 pandemic. I was actually in Beijing and then Hong Kong in January 2020. And as the virus first began to spread, watched the reaction of people in both of those cities. And I came back to Boston to make important decisions that affected the health of our 40,000 person university community, the education of our students, and the financial future of the university. These decisions were all clouded by enormous uncertainty and lack of preparation, both by us and by the country and by the world. We managed through fall 2020 and the following spring because we brought together the power of a research university. Infectious disease doctors, public health researchers, biostatisticians, biomedical engineers, and more. And we designed our own system for surveillance PCR testing for our research residential community. We managed by performing 6,000 PCR tests a day, combined with contact tracing and quarantining, all the elements you needed to put in place to stop the spread of the disease. Before the vaccines were delivered, we had administered over 1 million PCR tests. And if you asked me as a university president if I ever thought I'd be talking about giving 1 million PCR tests, the answer is no. Beacon was born out of these kinds of experiences by us and by people around the world. Beacon also represents the best of what I'll call boundaryless science that is possible in a modern research university and a community, bringing together data scientists and engineers, infectious disease specialists, and public health professionals to tackle this critical need. We've organized ourselves at Boston University to hopefully excel at this type of project, make it as easy as possible for faculty leaders like Nahid to work across our traditional academic boundaries and have high impact. But this effort goes much further than just the walls of Boston University. Dr. John Brownstein, who you'll hear from in a few minutes at Boston Children's Hospital, has brought his team's enormous experience in HealthMap to this effort. as well as the highly experienced subject matter experts who have joined us to form the global network. These human moderators bring decades of know-how to the project, with backgrounds ranging from epidemiology, public health, infectious disease, veterinary medicine, virology, I could go on. Many of them are with us today. We really appreciate your efforts. Beacon is a wonderful example of what people today call convergent science. Equally as important, it is an example of what universities, foundations, and individuals can do by banding together to fill a critical need for support. At a time when governments are contracting inward, away from the global community, we have been blessed by a set of visionary funders whose sponsorship has gotten us to where we are today. They include the university itself, the National Science Foundation, the Gates Foundation, as well as numerous generous family foundations. Finally, the efforts of Beacon are not guaranteed to be successful. It will only be successful if it is globally open and becomes a public and trusted platform for information on infectious disease. It must give fair and equitable access to its data, hopefully to support equitable deployment of healthcare resources. We are dedicated to creating that kind of environment. Now it is my pleasure to introduce Jeremy Farrar, who has been serving as the chief scientist at the World Health Organization since 2023. For all of you in biomedical research, Jeremy really needs little introduction, but I'll give a bit. Before joining WHO, he was the director of the Wellcome Trust for a decade, coming there after being the professor of tropical medicine and global health at the University of Oxford. He served as director of the Oxford University Clinical Research Unit in Ho Chi Minh City, and when he and a colleague identified the reemergence of H5N1, the deadly bird flu in humans. Jeremy could not be with us today in person, but he's joining us live virtually despite the late hour where he is currently. Thank you, and over to Jeremy.
Bob, thanks very much for the very kind introduction. It's a delight to be able to join you. I'm sorry I can't join you in person. As I've said to you many times, Bob, Boston is one of my favorite cities in the world, and it's very sorry. But as you can imagine, at the moment, we, as many people in global health, are going through an extraordinarily difficult time, and just was not the right time to be traveling. But I'm there with you in spirit, if not in person. And I'd like to start, though, by just giving huge credit to Naheed and Bob for the leadership that you've shown over the last many months, all hours of the day, to get to where Beacon is today. It's been an extraordinary leadership effort, and one that's been incredibly inclusive, open-minded, and I'm sure that sets the spirit going forward. And as a cricket-loving British citizen, Naheed, I won't get churlish about the 250th anniversary of the Revolutionary Wars, when you kicked us Brits out, and it's all been downhill for you since then. But anyway, baseball somehow replaced cricket. Huge pleasure to be able to join you. I don't think there could be a more important time to launch this sort of initiative. And the involvement, the consultation, the listening, the changing course, and the whole discussions with myself and also many other colleagues from the World Health Organization has been hugely appreciated. And I know you're going soon to visit the WHO hub in Berlin. And we welcome the program, we welcome the engagement, and delighted to see the Beacon program getting started. In this very difficult global era that we're living in at the moment, though, when many issues around global health, global affairs are enshrouded in some degree of uncertainty, the world is in a very complex place at the moment. But just as an example of something which I would like to start with, which is complementary to this initiative in many ways, and that is just over 2 weeks ago now, after many years of very difficult negotiations, which I was only very peripherally involved in, and I'd give credit to 194 countries, my colleagues in the WHO Secretariat, particularly Dr. Tedros and Dr. Mike Ryan and many others. The world, nevertheless, through those very difficult negotiations, came together and agreed a text for the pandemic accord through many different difficult negotiations. As an example of the threats that we face in the 21st century, and the fact that even in this fractured, maybe polarized world, actually there is still a value of multilateralism. There is still an opportunity to have hope. There is still the ability for the countries of the world to come together, and when it's faced with something like a pandemic threat of an emerging or re-emerging infection, the world can come together, and as a result, everybody is safer. So I pay tribute to all the countries involved in that. I pay tribute to the Secretariat, and it's an example in these difficult times where you can actually come together and solve a global problem for the global common good. If we look back, and Bob was kind enough to talk about the 18 years I spent in Vietnam between 1995-6 and 2013. And if you look back in that time, since I first sort of went to Vietnam in 1995, 1996, just look back over that 25, 30-year period and go back to your own experiences of what we have faced through that time. And my own first engagement with the whole area of emerging and re-emerging infectious diseases was around the outbreak of Nipah virus in Malaysia in 1999. And since then, if you look forward over the next 25, 27 years, just think of the major events that have happened that have either been very disruptive locally, regionally, or indeed, as Bob said, with the COVID pandemic, at a global scale not seen for more than 100 years. Nipah virus, H5N1, H1N1, Ebola, MERS, SARS-CoV-1, SARS-CoV-2, Zika virus, Marburg, Lassa, measles outbreak at the moment. That's not even mentioning the seasonal and increasing frequency of dengue outbreaks around the world, Japanese encephalitis, chikungunya, the ongoing pandemics of HIV and tuberculosis, and of course the increasing and growing threat of antimicrobial resistance. And that is just essentially on the human side. If you then added the animal and agricultural side to that, we are in an era of more frequent and more complex epidemics, and we're in an era of more frequent and complex pandemics, as everybody in the room will know. And those are not isolated, discrete episodes. They are the symptoms of key drivers that are going to be with us for the whole of the 21st century. We are in a epidemic and pandemic era at the moment because of climate change, biodiversity loss, change of relationships and interactions between humans and animals, the wildlife trade, lab safety, of course, and urbanization, where events such as SARS-CoV-2 can be amplified in big cities of many, many millions of people, and then through trade and travel spread incredibly quickly around the world. These are all defining features of the 21st century. Many of those are going to remain with us throughout the rest of this century. And that is the reason why over the last 25, 27 years and over the next 25 to 20, 30 years, we are going to be living in an era of more frequent and more complex epidemics and pandemics. In that same time, and we witnessed this during COVID to a remarkable degree, we are living in a scientific golden age where the development of diagnostics, therapeutics, and vaccines is now able to go at a pace and a degree of safety and efficacy that we've not been able to do ever before. And the scientific advances that were witnessed during COVID, built up over decades of investment in basic science, including through great institutions in the United States and around the world, led to the breakthroughs that were described during COVID. But we shouldn't forget, they were based on incredible long-term sustained investment in basic science that allowed mRNA and other techniques for vaccine development and therapeutics to come through in COVID. We are truly living in a golden scientific age. But all of that ability to make countermeasures, whether they be diagnostics, treatment, or vaccines, critically depends on your ability to identify something that is emerging as quickly as you can. And in those sort of circumstances, days and hours actually matter. And then the ability to take that surveillance and then make sure it's available to everybody around the world. And so that populations, citizens, academics and industry can then start to work together, as happened so fruitfully and so productively during COVID. But it starts with the surveillance, and it starts with the ability to take that surveillance and make it available to the maximum number of people in the most open, transparent, available and accessible information flow, and also the ability to not just put that surveillance out there into the open, where there are hundreds of events that happen on a daily basis. WHO is following events on an hourly basis all around the world. There's a critical need to then take that information, whether it be from academic literature, from the media, from news reports, from wherever that comes from, put it into context and put it into a trusted source that can then synthesize that information and make it available, as well as filtering out the information which is not going to lead to an epidemic, because we are in an era of information overload, and the ability to have sites, including Beacon, that can then synthesize that information, make it available, make it accessible, freely available to everybody, so that everybody has access to it, I think is one of the most important features if we're going to actually address the ability to respond quicker to the future inevitable epidemics and pandemics. And of course, Beacon establishing itself now in this time of relatively or very fractured world, where the world is being pulled apart, as Bob said earlier, is an absolutely critical time. The features, Naheed was articulated those extremely well, as always, but just to pick out from our perspective, my perspective, the values that are behind this, the transparency, the openness, the high quality, the commitment to being trusted and trustworthy, to be open source, to be available to everybody wherever they live, anywhere in the world, in a accessible web design, and to have behind that modern cutting-edge technology which allows that information to be made available to everybody in multiple languages as it develops over time, all put into the context of the local environment in which it's happening, but also putting it in the context of the global potential response that needs to happen and the implications globally. Agnostic to where people live, agnostic to people's ability to pay, and freely and transparently available to everybody. That is a remarkable contribution to national, regional, and global public health, and I can do nothing but wish Beacon well in the future. I'm sure you will have the support of everybody in trying to do what you are doing, and you could not be launching at a better time. And I go back to where I started, with the celebration and the optimism of hope that actually in our fractured world, countries, member states, of the WHO, 194 of them, can come together and agree on something that's extraordinarily difficult. And as we pick up our newspapers on a daily basis or read on the internet what is happening in the world, which is very difficult at the moment, I think the fact that the countries came together and agreed on a pandemic accord to deal with this, one of these existential threats that we face in the 21st century, is a reflection that multilateralism still has a role in our world, and that the world is safer by working together. And I think Beacon fits those values in the same way that the pandemic accord will hopefully in the future. So Naheed, thank you very much. Bob, thank you for your leadership and all the team behind you. And I'm just sorry, and I hope to be in Boston at some point later this year to celebrate together. Thank you.
Jeremy, I was going to mention, I have a bone to pick with the British, not just as a naturalized citizen of the US, but as a prior citizen of India. I just want to mention that. Thank you so much. We really appreciate your time and your leadership and the wisdom that you've imparted to this team as we launch into this. We're now going to transition to the demo part, but before I do, for those of you who are not here in the room in person, there's a Red Sox game going on outside, so there's a whole bunch of people who just found parking. So if you want to come and sit down, please do. Join us to one of the seats so we can have everybody seated. So the next part of the program is having Dr. Yannis Paschalidis come up, but before he does, let me just introduce him. He's the director of Boston University's Rafiq B. Hariri Institute for Computing, Computational Science, and Engineering, a co-director of Beacon, and a distinguished professor of engineering. His team helped put together the LLM and the AI components that you'll see that he'll demo, in addition to the partnership with Boston Children's that we'll tell you a bit more about. Yannis, come on up.
All right, so what we'll do is we'll present a little bit first the general concept of beacon that Nahid will present, and then I'll take you a little bit behind the wheel, if you will, of the engine and show you how it works and some of the technical development that supports beacon. So maybe Nahid, you can...
Yeah, that's perfect. You know, when Yannis started working with me, he didn't realize what a mic hog I was. So when he put this demo together, I said, let me do the first 2 slides. I'll set the scene. And the reason I want to do this is to just reiterate what you've heard already. We live in an age of epidemics, and Beacon can't solve all the problems. There's a very specific problem it's solving. We don't do diagnostics, right? We don't do on-the-ground detection. We also are not involved, some of us are involved in responses, that's been part of my work, but Beacon is not involved in responses. But what the hope is that it connects that detection and that response together through reporting. That may seem like a simple problem, but getting accessible, fast, near real-time analysis of threats is critical because currently when you look at what's available, there are a couple of barriers. Political transparency. Many of the threats that we see reported are human health related. You have disparate sources from which all this information is coming from. It's unclear what you can trust. Data sharing and interoperability are challenges partly. If you wanted to share, they're just different ways that data are organized. There's language barriers. There is the focus on really just the place where you live, you know, rather than the whole globe, which is really what we're sort of aiming to focus on. And a lot of the work that we've seen that's out there is behind a paywall. And what we wanted to do is to create something that gives that context, that ability to prognosticate and prioritize and put it out to the rest of the world. So with that, I'll just give you a little sense of what the overall workflow looks like. You'll hear a little bit about the signal detection and how it presents to Beacon. But our data comes from HealthMap, the program that Dr. John Brownstein runs at Boston Children's. And in addition to that, direct partnerships. And that makes up a huge part of our pipeline. And then we have direct partnerships with public health organizations as well as individual communications as they come in. These are then processed by Pandemic IQ, Llama LLM, which Yannis will talk about. And it helps signal prioritize. It helps with translation. It helps with copy editing and drafting that initial report. And it's trained on 16 years of HealthMap data, in addition to a whole body of other literature that Yannis will talk about. That data, that data and that report is presented to a human. A human will always be in the loop here at Beacon. There will always be signals. We might be, you know, we've noticed that the whole thing can go through very fast. You'll see this when Yannis demos. The barrier is the human, not because we can't do it fast enough, but there are times where we're going to wait for a second source. We're not just going to share something until we can verify it. And so we'll talk a little bit about that process. And many of our colleagues who are presenting today are then going to offer those reports up to an open source resource that's available to everybody. And then down the road, we're hoping to introduce more predictive intelligence. Yannis.
Okay. So I'll talk a little bit about HealthMap. As Nahid mentioned, HealthMap was created at Boston Children's Hospital with John Brownstein and his team. And HealthMap, in fact, was created in 2006, so it has been running for quite some time, and they have a lot of experience doing exactly what we need them to do. It uses an automated web crawler to scrape information from many different sources across the World Wide Web. It monitors more than 170 or so public and private sources. And this covers more than 200,000 websites that are spanning 14 different languages. And then HealthMap does some pre-processing before it presents the information to the Beacon queue for further processing by the LLM. So they use natural language processing, and every source, every information that they discover is analyzed. It generates some characteristics about the disease that is being involved. It creates a short summary, and it is then that it sort of enters the Beacon queue. And here you see in perhaps a little bit more detail what is happening behind the scenes of the health map. So there are a number of different agents, scrapers that are essentially looking around for any new report, any outbreak report that may appear. And then there are other agents that are extracting some very basic information, identifying the disease and the place, and creating a small summary, and also doing some very rough initial categorization in terms of something being important, breaking, as they call it, and only those that are more important incidents and events are being then fed into the beacon queue. So once they enter the beacon queue, then there is a set of LLM agents that are performing a number of different tasks that you see outlined in this slide. So some of these tasks include filtering of the information to make sure that we are going to report something that is disease-based and doesn't talk about, for instance, a government program regarding a disease. So there's that filtering. There is some very basic information extraction that takes place, and you will see this running in real time, evaluates the recency of the information, the quality of the report, the urgency, whether that's something important that we need to report very quickly because this helps the subject matter experts, and also evaluates the source, the trustworthiness of the source where the information is coming from. And then at the very end, it assigns a risk score, and I'll walk you through how that risk score gets assigned. Then it produces a draft report automatically through the LLM process, and there will always be humans in the loop, the subject matter experts. That's when they enter. They are going to read that report, potentially make changes, add additional context, and then finally, once they approve it for being published on the Beacon website, then that goes back to the LLMs that translate it into actually 7 different languages, and that's something that we could expand into in the future, and then gets published on the Beacon website.
Wait, so Yannis, you know I only learned about AI LLM after I met you. And if there are other people in the audience who don't know what an AI agent is or an LLM agent is, can you explain that?
So I'm sure many of you have interacted with large language models. ChatGPT is one large language model. So essentially, it is a fairly complex neural network that has been trained on a very large corpus of documents. In the case of these commercial LLMs, they have been trained essentially on everything that has ever been written and everything that has appeared on the web. And they have the ability of generating text, and also they have reasoning ability in the sense that you can ask them specific questions and then you get answers to these questions. Now, the generic LLMs that you see out there, the commercial LLMs, do not necessarily have domain expertise. So they are generalists. They are good at sort of answering any random question. But then if you ask a very specific question about an infectious disease, then that's something that they may not do very well, particularly because in their training set, the fraction of documents that correspond to infectious diseases and epidemics is a small fraction. So what we did is we took one of these generic LLMs, particularly the Llama LLM, which was constructed by Meta, because it's an open source model. And then we trained it in 2 different settings, 2 different phases. The first phase is trying to infuse a lot of the epidemic infectious disease priority pathogen knowledge that generic LLMs will not have. And then the second phase is actually trying to optimize the LLM in order to be able to perform all of the tasks that you see in this pipeline. So for phase 1, we collected a large number of documents, a large corpus of documents, few papers, 500,000 or so from the
Just a few.
PubMed, about 6,000 books, many other documents from reliable, trustworthy sources. These account for about 48 gigabytes of information, about 6 billion tokens, so that's roughly maybe 3 billion words. And the generic LLM was now fine-tuned using these documents in order for the weights of the neural network to adjust and essentially ingest that knowledge. And then in the second phase, as Nahid mentioned, we used a lot of prior examples of epidemics, of outbreaks, and you can see them here listed. And we performed all of the tasks that I described in the pipeline and asked for help from high-end, very large models, for instance, some of the models from OpenAI, and those examples were then given to our own LLM to essentially optimize its weight so that it can perform better the tasks that we want it to perform. So we host our LLMs for now in a private repository in so-called Hugging Face. That's the world's marketplace or repository for domain-specific LLMs. And we have plans to make that public. Just to give you a sense of, we have trained a variety of models from 1 billion to 3 billion to 8 billion to up to 70 billion parameters. To give you a sense of the computational burden of training this type of models, for the larger models, 70 billion parameters, it takes about 11,000 GPU hours. So that's more than a year. Of course, we don't use a single GPU. We use a cluster of GPUs from the NVIDIA cluster that have been available to us through a grant from the National Science Foundation and also through a collaboration with the Department of Energy. So to train this large model, it takes about a couple of weeks in that cluster that we have available.
I want to make sure everybody heard what Yannis just said, which is that it's not just the reports that are on the website that are open source and available to everyone, but when we validate and we have perfected the model that where we feel where we can share this with confidence, the models are open source as well. The methodology is open source. And that's what truly makes us different than everybody else.
So then I'll discuss a little bit about how the various tasks are being performed by the LLM agents. First of all, you will see some examples of that. Sometimes specific information about a disease may not be available in a report. So we have to augment that information, and you will see that we also cite the source where that additional piece of information is coming. So we have built a so-called RAG system, retrieval augmented generation, and that's where it goes and looks for information that may be missing from the report. In order to do the risk scoring, together with the help of the SMEs, we have identified 6 different scores that we assign to a specific story about pathogen characteristics, clinical impact and disease manifestation, transmission dynamics, geographic and demographic information, healthcare system capacity, where the outbreak emerged and where they have that capacity to handle the outbreak, and then external risk factors that, as we saw during the COVID pandemic, are quite important, political and social factors, environmental factors. And then each one of these categories is scored with a score from 1 to 5, 5 being most severe. And then all of these are weighted, so we take a weighted average of these individual scores to produce an overall risk score that then becomes available to the SMEs. And then also we are asking additional questions to the LLM. So how up to date is the information, how trustworthy is the source, whether the signal itself and the way it is written reflects quality or not, and then how immediate is the required response. And then the LLM is categorizing answers in these categories that you see outlined in the slide. So for instance, critical versus very recent for the recency evaluation and other categories that you see listed. So this is a bit more technical for those of you that are interested in these things. So this tells you, so the top rows of this table correspond to the pandemic llama LLM, variety of different models. So the exact match is telling you the category that is assigned by that LLM, how well it matches the category that may be assigned by a commercial top-of-the-line LLM. And then the BERT score tells you the following. For every category assignment, we also ask the LLM to provide a reasoning. And that's important because the SMEs may see this is critical, but what is the reasoning? Because they can then second guess the reasoning and potentially correct the logic. So the BERT score shows you how similar is the reasoning with either human experts or with top-of-the-line commercial LLMs. And the point I want to make is if you take sort of a generic LLM, a generic llama, and you try to do these things, you get the type of accuracies that you see in the bottom of the slide, 61%, 87% here. So there's a very significant jump, up to 30 percentage points in terms of how our own domain-adapted LLM can do, which suggests that domain adaptation and instruct tuning are important steps in this process. So next, what I will do is I'll take a recent story. It's an outbreak of measles in Vietnam. And I'll take you step by step, and then I'll show you how it works behind the scenes.
Good, some action. Let's see it.
So this is a link to that story. It was reported by Asia News in the beginning of January. So you can see the LLM does some very basic extraction of information from the story in a very structured way. We have instructed it to do it in this way, provides a summary, identifies the disease, the event date, the date where the outbreak report was published, city, for instance, demographic, symptoms, incubation. If you notice on incubation, it says not mentioned in the article, but because we have this RAG system that supports the LLM, it says measles typically has an incubation period of 10 to 12 days, and this is cited from the CDC. So augmenting what is in the story is important, and the LLM has the ability to do that. So then it goes through the various steps that I described, assessing the quality of the report, assessing the recency, the urgency, the reliability, and then it goes into the risk scoring mode. It assigns scores for the 6 different categories that I described. It gives you a reasoning for each one of these categories, and then at the very end computes an overall score, which here happens to be 4, and then it gives you an overall reasoning for that score that it has assigned. And then it generates automatically a report. So this is a draft report for the SMEs to go and edit. And you can see again is a structured report because we have instructed it to provide the report in this specific format. And finally, once the SMEs go edit that report, they may change things, they may add additional context. Then the LLM again takes over and then translate it into these 7 different languages. And here you see an instance of a translation in French, which I used to speak a little bit of French. It's okay. I don't know if it's perfect French, but nevertheless, it's comprehensible. So I'll show you a bit behind the scenes how this works. And this is essentially the API that we are running and how we are interacting with the HealthMap team, which is responsible for supporting the SME's closed editor system and also for putting the information on the Beacon website. So it's the same story that you saw in the slides, and this is not optimized for viewing. So what we'll do is...
I'll just pretend it looks like everything else I see now that I'm nearsighted. So
it will sort of execute, and then you will see that a new signal gets generated, and here it shows you how far it has gone in terms of processing that signal. So it goes to the link, it retrieves the information, and you can see the type of processing that it does. So already it has processed the signal, evaluated recency, evaluated the source, the quality, the urgency. And then the item, the task that takes a little bit more time is evaluating the risk score, assigning the risk score, because that involves several calls to the underlying LLM. So if we'll wait a little bit more time. So this takes, I think, about maybe 2 minutes or so. It depends on how loaded is the system. And maybe perhaps, Nahid, you can compare this with the time that it took about 2 years ago or in other systems in order to go and process that information and do all of these tasks.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? I mean, having the capacity to have a ready-made report absolutely cuts down the human time to create that. It allows us to then spend that time on context. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. And it allows us to be able to then spend the time to see if there are additional verifying sources that we can put into the report in addition to the initial report that was identified by HealthMap or sent in to us by contributors. All right, is this that embarrassing moment where it takes more than 2 minutes?
We'll see. I hope not. So we can see now that it's in the mode where it evaluates the severity.
There you go.
And it's done. So it took 2 minutes. So now once this is done, I will generate a report. So I will ask it to generate a report. And that's sort of instantaneous, pretty much. We'll see the report being posted. Processing report data, and took less than 10 seconds. If we go back to the signal, can sort of see here all of the items that I highlighted in the slide. So the country where it occurred, latitude, longitude, summary, diseases, pathogens, the dates, summary, symptoms, fatalities, incubation, transmission. All of this is automatically extracted from the original report. And then now we have a report that will then be edited by the SMEs. Once the SMEs do their editing, then there is another functionality where I'm executing it right now, and then it goes into translation mode. So it starts translating the report, and you will see here in the logs what it does. So translating to all of the supported languages, and it's very easy to augment it, to add additional languages, English, Arabic, and it will also take about a minute or 2 minutes or so in order to produce, and you see the progress here. So now that's the entire report that gets translated into these 7 different languages. So Chinese, French, and will be quickly, fairly soon done, and then we will have the report in all of the languages that then through the API is pushed back to the Beacon team for displaying it into the Beacon website.
And it's interesting, right? Because HealthMap sends us signals hour on the hour. And based on the timing that you're seeing, we then have the capacity to have the LLM do this instantly, to be able to do it really in a couple of minutes. And really that time that's spent is verification, is contextualization, is the capacity to then make sense of that signal in addition to what the LLM has already provided in terms of context about what it means to communities, and then enriching that report with resources that communities can use to be able to prepare themselves.
Okay, so this is done. It took a minute. We'll go back to the slides. And
yeah.
So Nahid, maybe you want to say something
I
about
was going to say,
what the SMEs
people
are doing.
Right, people are probably wondering if you're making everything free, all the data free, and eventually when you perfect the model, you make the model free. Are you crazy? Like, people will just copy you. They will just do it on their own, right? You know, what sets us aside is the human side. We have incredibly senior experts who have been advising us, who are part of the project, who have spent decades. Doctors Larry Madoff, Maria Jacobs, Marjorie Pollack, Matt Levinson, people who bring incredible, not just subject matter expertise, but a sense of how you report on informal surveillance-based data, and to be able to sort of share that for the rest of the world in a way that makes sense. So you can see the wide range of domains that we are representing, and a human in the loop always ensures that that bit of trust is there. And it can only come from that. You can have the knowledge, the wisdom only comes from that experience. And that also brings with it a network of trust that has been developed through decades of working together. And that's what makes Beacon even more incredible, in addition to all the technological knowledge that you see listed here. Oops, can you go back?
Yes.
I just wanted to say, you know, it is, so you might say, well, then what's really the job of the report in addition to, you know, the reporters, the SMEs, in addition to the stuff that you've talked about in terms of contextualizing? We spent a lot of time with our senior advisors, with our team members, thinking about editorial policies. You can report something, but what does verification mean? What do those policies look like, right? How do we train LLMs to grow? LLMs are as good as what you put in them, right? It's the knowledge. How do we get them to be even better for non-human diseases? Animals, plants, toxins, and a lot of the work that was done to train the LLMs came from working with SMEs. And it's a virtuous cycle, working with the same SMEs over time to identify additional databases, additional references, additional partnerships that help enrich the LLM to get better. In addition to that, we make sure everything else is right. We don't want to tell you something has a severity score of like 5, and it's not. And then we also provide, our goal is really to provide a lot of that additional material that provides context. Let's go through.
So maybe you can show them a bit the system where you work.
So I did a couple of reports this morning, and I did them in haste, but you'll see that we're up to date as of like an hour or two, and there are others who are posting now. So these are all the raw signals that come into Retool program that is off the shelf, but then adapted by our colleagues at Boston Children's and HealthMap to present all these incredible raw signals that are coming in. So SMEs go in, they look at these raw signals, they're then processed through the LLM. So there's a processed LLM component of it. We pick the ones that we want to create reports on, because that's where human judgment comes in. We then generate those reports automatically, which Yannis already went into, so I won't go into. And then once those things are created, what I'll show you is that the way we share data is in a particular way. We have an event envelope. Events are any biological incidents, cases, clusters, suspicious, group of illnesses that could be infectious diseases, as well as outbreaks. We organize events as a biological incident or a particular known pathogen. And then because outbreaks aren't a one-day event, sometimes they drag on. We have multiple reports that we then put into a single event that defines the entire biological incident. So how do I get to
other website?
Sorry, I didn't mean to bring up your taxes. Okay, so you can see the reports from this morning. We had another polio case in Pakistan, for example. So we've added a polio that's more global because it's rarer. What you'll see about this website, and I want to start by saying this, it is very easy to make simple things complicated. It is very hard to make complicated things look simple. We wanted an approach, when you look at the design, of something that was intuitive. All of us get our information from social media, and even though this is not a social media feed, it allows you to sort of get that feeling, understand how data is coming in and how to update it and go through. What you'll see on the right is that we're in beta version. The current model has all that technology and expertise that I talked about, but there's some fast follow features that will come through, including a search bar, event filtering, translation, contextualized maps, additional ability to share to social media, which will help the user experience even better. We wanted to get to this honestly because it's kind of a rough time out there on infectious diseases surveillance, and this was a really important resource that was needed in the moment currently. In addition to what you see is the events that are listed here, and you can explore this at beaconbio.org today. You will also see an about page. Let me see, there's a couple other things. I think for each of the different sources, you will additionally see, for example, Lassa fever in Nigeria, we've provided all the information of all the reports in that event over time, right? So all the outbreaks will be in one place, and you can see a report drop down that gives you a dated report of what was reported at that particular date. And then below it, of all the reports, you will see situation reports, reference materials, things that are from that region that really help enrich the understanding of a particular outbreak. And then you see the usual things you see elsewhere. We have resources such as meetings that are coming up, reports, media mentions and publications, as well as a blog. And you can find out a lot more about our methodology. So you'll ask, do you report every single infectious diseases case in the world? No. That's where this whole expertise bit comes in. We report things that are events-based, that have public health significance, that are either could pose a big risk, they represent a change in trend. So maybe, measles outbreak. We're reporting on the West Texas outbreak that's expanding in multi-state because it's very different than what's, historically happened, right? So we make choices. That's why it's an informal surveillance system. And we don't fill all the holes. We make a judgment about what we think is important. And so that's important to remember. The other things that we share is first times. First time you've seen this disease in a brand new place. This is important for a couple of reasons. Our audience is public health experts who may already be following this, but it's also clinicians. If you're seeing, a polio case for the first time, you may want to know, what does that mean, right? How do I treat this patient? I remember all of us have been in that situation when we started dealing with COVID patients. For those of us who are in that response and who are clinicians in the audience or are online, having those resources that are focused allows a larger audience to be engaged with the data that we're presenting.
So going back to
yes,
slides.
I will just end with one last slide. I promise I will give you the mic after that. Okay. I want to make this point again. We're accessible, we're open source, we're context driven, we're One Health focused, and we're globally based. We currently have SMEs in 4 continents, and that's rapidly expanding. They represent not just geographic expansion, but also disciplinary, veterinary, wildlife. We're going to expand further to plants and toxins. Currently, you'll see a lot of the coverage is human with some smattering of animal diseases. That will only deepen over time. We have, in addition to this platform and program, we see ourselves truly not just as a platform, but a public health program. We have an international governance board that I'll share the names of some of our board members, but we're also aiming to create a global training program and a community of practitioners, which involves many, many different disciplines. So how do we make Beacon great? We need you. In addition to public health reports, in addition to public health organizations, Beacon depends, as you saw, request information, big button on the front of the thing, on the platform that we shared, that allows everybody to see something, share something that could be a potential outbreak that's reported in your region that may not have come across our radar. Shall we? Is that it?
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
And then before you close, you see our pictures here. But I also want to mention that there is a very large team behind this and what we saw today. On my side, on the Hariri Institute side, 2 fantastic graduate students that are here, Jingmei and Mahtab, and also the integration and the creation of the API that interacts with the HealthMap team was done by the SAIL lab, the Software and Application Innovation Lab that is based at the Hariri Institute. Again, they are here. And also there is a significant team supporting John, and some important members of that team are here as well behind all of
We're going to forget somebody and they're going to be mad, but I'm going to say it. Kara, Autumn, Josh, Mark, Spencer. And I also want to say the CEID staff, Emily and Cassandra and Anna, who've been incredible. And that's it. That's the end of the demo because we got important things to move on to.
All right.
All right. I want to take this moment to present our next speaker, who we are so honored to help launch Beacon into the world. Prior to stepping down from her position this month, maybe like just the last few days, former Secretary Yvonne Howe served in Governor Maura Healey's cabinet as the Secretary of Executive Office of Economic Development. She has had more than 25 years of executive business experience as a senior executive, including as co-founder, advisor, and managing editor at investment firm Cove Hill Partners, as well as operating partner at Pillar Ventures. Previously, she was the chief operating officer and the chief financial officer of PillPack, an online pharmacy that was acquired by Amazon in 2018, giving her really that background and understanding of health uses of technology. She's a former operating partner at Bain Capital. In addition, Secretary Howe has been a board director of companies such as Car Gurus, Flywire, Gentherm, ZipRecruiter, and Bose. And she's also been involved in the community and is the vice chair of the board of trustees of Beth Israel Lahey Health and a trustee emeriti of her alma mater, Williams College. Secretary Howe, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much, Nahid, and thank you so much, Yannis. And huge thanks to Bob Brown for inviting me and for all that you've done for our state. It's been such an honor. So this is, I've been looking forward to this. Ever since Bob reached out about this, I've been looking forward to this. I apologize because I didn't realize that this would be actually 2 days after I stepped down. So I'm so sorry that I'm the former. You're getting kind of a has-been, so I apologize about that. And it has been a very difficult decision. I have been tremendously privileged and honored to be in this role, to serve in our state. And top of the reasons why I've loved this role is because of all of you. I mean, so I was just reminiscing in the back. Some of the most exciting, inspiring meetings I've had have been in this building, and actually some of them in this room, talking about all the amazing things all of you are doing around life sciences and curing disease, around AI and robotics, and all of the awesome things, including now Beacon. So it has been really a privilege, but today's Beacon talk is a lot about health. And unfortunately, my dad passed away 7 years ago yesterday. My mom has been in the ER, and many people will do this job much better than me, but only I can be her daughter and take care of her. So I apologize that I am a former as of 2 days ago. But one of the reasons that I felt good about this decision was because I know all of you are here, and I talk all the time about Team Massachusetts, and it's all of you. We have the best team, this incredible group of wicked smart people doing amazing things, and I have so much confidence, and I'm not going anywhere. So I will still be riding my bike all around, being all sweaty, showing up at events every now and then. But one of the things I was thinking about when I was biking over is how I love this name, Beacon. Well, first of all, it's a cool acronym. So Biothreat, Emergence, Analytics, and Communications Networks. It's very clever, whoever thought of this. So it is a very apt acronym. But I was thinking about Beacon as a concept because today, biking here, it's very bright. And actually, you don't really need a beacon. I kind of knew where I was going. I could see this building from wherever I was, and I didn't even have to look at my Google Maps. I kind of knew how to get here. I was thinking about, when do you need a beacon? And actually, the times when you need a beacon the most is when times are dark, and when you don't know where you're going, and when it's challenging, and you don't know the road, and it's really scary. And that's when you want the beacon. And unfortunately for us, I think we're living in that time right now. I'm coincidentally going to Texas this weekend for a reunion with some friends, and I went to go Google the weather. And I just put in, the first thing that comes up is a measles outbreak. How did we think that we'd be here in 2025 with diseases that we thought we'd eradicated now coming back and spreading across the country? And, the defunding of things like USAID or the CDC, or people not believing in things like vaccines. We are in some dark times. This is when we need a beacon right now. And I was actually also thinking about when I was biking over my weekend, and I spent Saturday morning and Friday night at the 250th anniversary celebrations of Paul Revere's ride and William Dawes's ride and the Battle of Lexington and Concord. And you think about, that was an interesting time. And Paul Revere was a beacon. He rode through the night and then was captured, but he rode through the night as a beacon to tell every town. It turns out the British are coming is not actually what happened. They said the regulars are out. The British Army was called the regulars, but he rode through every town. He was the beacon that helped warn everybody of what was to come and help people organize and help prepare those original OG Team Massachusetts folks on Lexington Green at 5 a.m., getting ready for the British to march in and to start the revolution and lead that revolution, to win the revolution that created this country. We have always been a beacon here in our state. It's why our state house is on Beacon Hill. And the other thing is that I was thinking about is that recently I've been thinking a lot about, so I have many bracelets, my Team Massachusetts one being obviously my most constant one, but this bracelet I got a month ago, this is actually a rosary from the Vatican. So in this job, I've gotten to do many, many interesting things, but one of them was I was invited to go speak at the Vatican at a global summit for AI. And it was fascinating. The Pope was supposed to be with us the whole time. He turned out to be sick and was in the hospital, but he sent several of his most senior cardinals, and it's fascinating. Now they're the ones who are being rumored to be the next Pope, but they sat in these meetings with us for several days, and we had people from around the world sharing their views on AI. And it was simultaneous translation. So many of them were talking in Portuguese and in Spanish and in French and German. And I would say most of the people who presented from around the world were very negative on AI. Most of them were saying, we're very scared. It's going to bring biases. It's going to take away jobs. It's going to create more income inequality. This is going to be a very scary thing. It's just like social media. We're very terrified of AI. And so I think AI, we're in the early days, and it is also kind of cloudy and murky. This is when we also need a beacon. So then it got to be my turn to speak, and I said, well, unfortunately for us, I don't think AI is going away. I think the toothpaste is kind of out of the tube. You're not going to get it back. How do we brush our teeth the best possible ways with this toothpaste? And so in our state, we have a history, starting from 250 years ago, of embracing technologies, innovating new technologies, and using them for good. And the Pope, actually, I read his book as part of my preparations for the trip. He has a book that he wrote called Hope. He talks a lot about how in these challenging times, you need hope. You need a beacon to guide the way. And that's what our state does. And Beacon, this project, is the exemplar of what I talked about how we're going to use AI for good, to solve real problems, to make people's lives better. And we can get into all the technical things, which Yannis and many of you are much smarter about around llama and LLMs and Bayesian algorithms and zoonotic diseases and all kinds of things. I was trying to get smart looking at this stuff. But at the end of the day, what we're talking about is humans. We're talking about people's lives. We're talking about kids and families who are going to get diseases and may die. And how do we use technology like AI that's so powerful and that has so much potential? How do we apply it to real problems to help people live better lives? That's what we do in Massachusetts. We've always done that. One of my other bracelets is my JFK bracelet. We don't do things because they're easy. We choose to go to the moon because it's hard. And this is a hard time. And this is why we need beacons. So in our state, we've always led with innovation. We've always led with values. We're the first public school, first state constitution, first state to have universal health care, first state to have universal marriage rights. And we're the first state to have, cancer treatment, to have the steel production, to have a sewing machine, to invent the missile, the birth control pill, the COVID vaccine. And now we have Beacon. This is what we're going to do with AI. So the governor last year, as we were putting together our economic development plan, she kind of also realized this AI thing is not a fad. We should do something about it. She put together an AI task force with 20-some people from around the state, all different backgrounds, our incredible university academics, our researchers, our startups, our investors, legislators, union members, people from around the state. And then we worked together for many months, and we argued and debated, and we had heated debates about how should our state leverage AI? And then we ended the year with a set of recommendations. And if you're interested, you can go see the recommendations from the AI task force. We published in December. But the goal of the recommendations was really around three things. And the first is we're here to lead by applying AI to solve problems and to do it with values. And you all just reflected all of the values we talked about. Being human-centered, human-moderated, doing it for good, making sure there's safety, making sure it's open source and it's available to everybody. This is the type of values that we want to use when we do AI, and this is what Beacon's about. The second thing we said is we need to have infrastructure. And so Bob volunteered and is championing this incredible effort to get all of us to work together as Team Massachusetts to collaborate and invest together to put the latest and greatest compute power in Holyoke, where we have green, clean, inexpensive energy to make compute available to everybody. So it's not just the fancy, super, wealthy companies that can access, the compute power, but we'll make it available to everybody to do their research, to try their algorithms. We also need good data. AI is only as good as the data, and this is a big part of what Beacon was aiming at, is how do we make sure the data that we use is representative, is holistic, is accurate, and that's a big part of our state's AI task force. So one is values, two is this infrastructure around compute and around data. The third piece is how do we build an ecosystem? Just like we did in life sciences across the river there in Kendall Square, how do we create the kind of bump factor where everybody's working together, everybody's collaborating? This is exactly what Beacon is doing. You're doing this already here with BU, but also with Children's and also with, I was just at dinner with President Gilliam, and she was talking with the CEO of Boston Medical Center about projects. So you all are such a connector already of working together collaboratively to create that ecosystem, to share ideas so that we can actually innovate and solve these problems faster and better. So that is really what we're trying to do. We passed an economic development bill last year. It is a $4 billion bill. It's $1 billion for life sciences, which supports things like Beacon and all of the rest of our ecosystem. There's still a lot of people who are sick. There's still a lot of diseases to be cured, and we want to be on the leading edge of that. There's another $1 billion for climate tech, which is the next existential crisis and threat to our humanity. And we want to make sure, again, that we lead using innovation for good purposes, and in the process, creating all kinds of jobs and companies. And then there are separate resources, including $100 million just for AI, as well as many other pools of money that will all be applied to AI research and grants and workforce development. So this is what we do in our state. We are living in, these are going to be interesting, challenging times. And I would be lying if I said that I wasn't worried or that I woke up every day kind of reading the news and felt awesome about the state of the world. These are not great times. These things are happening now that are not good. But the other thing that's true that I do think about all the time is I can't think of a better place to live right now in the world than here in Massachusetts. I look at this room, I look at Beacon, I look at all of you, I look at this ambition that you have to do this hard work, to create this tool that is going to make people's lives better by helping us find out where these outbreaks are happening faster, help us eradicate them sooner, help collaborate across all these different regions. This is a pretty amazing thing that we have here, and this state is special and is important now more than ever. Just like we did 250 years ago with being a beacon and leading, and just like with Beacon leading here, but our state right now, this is a time for all of us to work together and to be more nimble, more creative, more entrepreneurial, more kind of organized, and just like this Beacon project, to try to make sure that we are the beacon, not just for our state, but for the country and the world. So thank you so much. I'm so grateful for all that you do. I'm so grateful for this incredible team, Massachusetts, and especially to BU and Nahid and Yannis and Bob. So very, very grateful. Thank you. Yeah, sure. Happy to take questions.
So we're going to have Secretary Howe take a couple of questions.
The one best thing about this decision is now everyone can just call me Yvonne. This is like one of the weirdest part about my job. So I've always been Yvonne. I am just still Yvonne. So yes.
So I think we have, Cassandra, do we have online questions?
We actually have several about the platform, which maybe we can address later.
Okay.
But for Yvonne, how do we have... Oh, sorry. If you couldn't hear me, there were some great questions that came in about the demonstration, actually. But if for now there's anyone in the audience here who has any questions for Secretary Howe, we can pass the mic around to you guys.
Well, I have a question for you. How do you, in this, one of the challenges that we have, Yvonne, is that we're trying to bridge and change the culture of sharing data. This has been a challenge in infectious diseases all the time. And I'm guessing, even though you're building this AI hub here in Massachusetts, you work so hard on it, that collaborations will get harder the more distant you get from sort of the local community. We've had that challenge in pandemic agreements about how governments share. How do you get around that trust issue to get people to collaborate? Because AI in some ways here in this country is becoming commercial, commodified.
Yeah, this is the biggest challenge, and one of the realizations I had when I came in this job is we're an incredible state. We're $780 billion GDP, so our state is bigger than the country of Ireland. We're a third the size of Canada in terms of our economy. We're actually also the wealthiest state, highest income per capita, and we have the leaders across every single sector. The leading universities, the leading hospitals, the leading life sciences firms, the leading banks, the leading investors. We are an incredibly lucky state in so many ways. But one of the hard things about that is that when you've been successful for a long time, and I come from the business world, as Nahid mentioned, this is my first time in state government this last couple of years, In business, when you've been successful for a long time, it's very easy to become complacent and to become complex and to become very siloed. And so one of the most interesting other trips I took in this job is I went to North Carolina, and it was very fascinating. North Carolina didn't have as much as we do. They were a tobacco state, so they kind of didn't have a lot of this. But then they wanted to catch up. And so they had couple universities. They didn't have a lot, but they were nimble and they were simple. And because they were trying to kind of leapfrog and be an innovator, they were much more open to sharing everything, to saying, okay, how do we work together? Okay, UNC, you give up a little bit, and North Carolina State, you do this, and Duke, you're going to do this, and we're going to try to get all of these people to come to the Research Triangle. We have a much more complex ecosystem here. And so an example, so this is a good problem to have. It's a real strength of our ecosystem, but it means we also have to be intentional about breaking down those silos and actually working together. I'll give you two good examples of how we do that. So one is that I was on the board of Beth Israel. I was the vice chair of the board when the pandemic happened. And we had 7 a.m. calls most days. And these were crazy times in those early days of the pandemic from many perspectives. One is people were dying and our hospitals were overloaded. The other was that I chaired the finance committee. We're losing like $100 million like every month. So these hospitals all usually compete. And they also fight with all the insurance companies. And they also fight with all the other people in the ecosystem. Everybody was on these 7 a.m. calls all day long, all week long, all month long, throughout this thing. And everybody was sharing. What are you doing? How are you doing this? So when we have a crisis and we have a common enemy and we have a common goal, we can work together and be so much better off. I'll give you another example. So I joined the administration in January of 2023. In March of 2023, ARPA-H, which is this President Biden big federal program, they announced they're going to choose 2 hubs in the country to be life sciences hubs. And it's a competition. So I said to the governor, well, what do we want to do? Do we want to try to win this? And she said, yeah, go talk to everyone, see if we can win this. So I went to go talk to everyone, and surprise, surprise, everybody was like, oh no, we're going to bid on our own. And we're going to bid on our own. And we can win this on our own. And I'm going to do this here, and I'm going to do that here. And I was like, wait a minute, guys, we're competing against other whole states or multiple states working together as a region. If each one of our universities, hospitals goes and tries to win on its own, we're going to lose. How about we work together as a team Massachusetts and overwhelm them with the star power we have here. And once we win, we can then figure out how we divide things up and everything. But let's all give up a little to kind of go in together. So we did that and we won. And it's been incredible. I think ARPA-H has given out maybe $2+ billion of funding, and we've received, I think, 600 million of that across all of our institutions because we work together to win that. So we know when we have a common goal and we have a mission, and especially when we have a crisis, we're very good under crisis, we can work together. That is this time right now. This is this time. We are living in extraordinary times, and this is not the time for us to be protecting and kind of thinking siloed about just my little thing. This is a time for all of us to be all in together on what can we share? How can we help each other? What's the best practice? And we're starting to do that already. We had a gathering, the governor and I pulled together a bunch of the CEOs and leaders of all of our institutions to talk about things like NIH funding and tariffs. And everybody was sitting together saying, okay, well, what can you do to help each other? These are people who compete every day in the markets, but they're all in this together because we know we're going to be stronger together. So that's the moment we're in, and we have to work together.
Thank you. Other questions for our secretary, Yvonne?
We have a question from the online audience. Someone asked, you mentioned the system being people-centered. How would you ensure or advise Beacon include a diversity of points of view from this rich state, not only with political, business, scientists, and academic leaders, but with the workers, students, and vulnerable positions that are affected by these diseases as well?
I love this question. This is something that we debated a lot in our AI task force, and we also talked a lot about at the Vatican. And actually, one of my favorite people that I've met in this role is Chrissy Lynch, who is one of our union leaders. And she and I don't agree on everything, but we have had really great conversations about this. So Chrissy and I were talking maybe 2 weeks ago, and with AI, we're in the early stages. We're in the first inning. We don't know how this game is going to end. We don't know what the result is going to be, and there's a fan of outcomes. On the extreme negative side, this could be really bad. We've seen what that looks like with social media. This could exacerbate income inequality. This could, kind of take away whole swaths of people's jobs. This could be, creating way more bias. There's a lot of bad things that could happen. So that's one extreme. The other extreme, there is a positive picture, I think. And I think AI actually has real potential in some really unique ways. So one is that for a long time, when we've had these big transformative technologies like the internet, like global free trade, the people who've benefited are people with college degrees and PhDs, like well-educated people. They're the ones who've gained a lot of the benefit. And people without college degrees or kind of doing working class jobs have really suffered. AI can bridge that because now you don't need to go to college to know how to code. You don't need to go to college to have the latest and greatest tools to help you diagnose or talk to a patient who is, at your, next to you. The places that AI is attacking the most actually are places where people with college degrees have done the best. It's lawyers, radiologists, copywriters, artists. And so AI is actually a very different technology that if we use it right could actually help, I think, close the gaps and help people do jobs in a way better way without having to necessarily go to a 4-year degree or to get a PhD. The other thing is that I'm a big believer in thinking hard about, and this is what Pope Francis talks a lot about, he was quite inspiring. Like you wouldn't think that the Pope would have such interesting insights on technology, but I fully agree with him, which is that there are certain things that technology is better at, and actually the work that technology is better at is actually not that human. So, for example, I was the COO and CFO of PillPack, which is an online pharmacy. So I joined that pharmacy and I would tour around. And so one day I was in the fulfillment center and I saw a pharmacist sitting at this desk, and there's a computer screen and there's 2 photos. And one photo shows a pack of pills, and it shows what should be in that pack of pills, like 3 round ones and 1 oval one. And the other one shows the actual photo of the pill. And there's a red button and a green button. And the pharmacist is sitting there for 8 hours a day with a break or 2, looking at the photos to see if they match and hitting the red or green button. That is not a human job. That is a terrible, mundane, mind-numbingly, kill your soul type of job. And by the way, humans are going to make mistakes at some point. So we actually ended up automating that with software and only did human checks by exception. And then we freed up those pharmacists to do the human job, which is when patients call and say, I just got diagnosed with cancer. I'm so scared, and my doctor prescribed, all these are medications. What should I do? Am I going to die? That is a human job. And so I think that there's so many jobs that AI will do better because they're not that human, and there's so many things only humans can do. And you think about it, AI is not going to fix your plumbing in your toilet. AI is not going to probably give you a haircut for a long time. When you're sitting and you need someone to hold your hand and to cry with you, AI is not going to do that. There are a lot of things that still need humans. And so I think this just requires intentionality. And one of the things that's a big priority in our state AI recommendations is workforce training and exposure. We're the #1 state in terms of public education. How do we make sure all of our population across all of our state and every background has the tools and has the education and the training to be able to use AI in the best ways? And if we do that, I think we can actually close some of the income inequality gaps and actually create so many more jobs that are more human and humane, and let AI and technology do some of the work that that technology is better at.
Thank you. We have another question. Oh,
yay, our intern.
Hi, thanks for coming. Your story of the Vatican is really interesting, as well as your points about Massachusetts being a leader in so many different firsts. So does Massachusetts have the ability to collaborate more internationally, working outside of our state silos, rather than waiting for our national government or the Vatican to invite us to share our international leadership on subjects like AI?
And the answer is yes. So one of the things that is so important to our state, so I just talked about the risks of being successful. When you're successful for a long time, you become an incumbent. It happens all the time in business. It also happens with countries and states. The rise and fall of the Roman Empire. It's kind of the inevitable decline of people who've been successful. That's not going to happen here. You know why it's not going to happen here? Because we are the consummate startup. The reason why we're the consummate startup is because every year we have an infusion of 500,000 of the best and brightest brains from around the country and the world coming to our state to study. That infusion of international and national talent means that we're always inventing and always kind of rethinking things and always pushing each other. That diversity of international and different ways of thinking, different ways of growing up, that's what makes our state the consummate startup. That's what keeps us inventing and hustling and being entrepreneurial. That's why we need immigration. That's why some of the things happening in DC are very challenging. But no, this is the time for us to partner with everybody as much as we can. So we have Team Massachusetts. We have to break down the silos here. But honestly, the more we can partner with other states, with other countries, the better. And our office has done a lot of that. So we spend a lot of time meeting with our friends in Canada, in all parts of Asia, in Europe, and talking about how can we actually do research projects together? How can we have your startups come here? How can we send our people there? So that is a big focus of this administration, and even with other states. When we won the ARPA-H, our state was the hub. We won together, but the spokes that we put together in our proposal cover I think 32 states, including many red states. At the end of the day, we all want the same things. We want to live great lives. We want to have our kids be healthy. We want to be safe. We want to, have good, culture and arts and food and transportation. We all want the same things. There's so much we have more in common than apart. We just need to work hard to find that and to collaborate. So thank you.
Just given the time, I'm going to take the moderator's privilege to say thank you so much, Secretary Howe, for another couple of weeks for me.
Thank you so much.
Amazing. Let me go back online and start with the next part of our program, in which Dr. John Brownstein, who's the Chief Innovation Officer at Boston Children's Hospital and a co-director of Beacon, and a professor of pediatrics and biomedical informatics at Harvard Medical School. As you've heard, John's team has been instrumental part of making Beacon's platform, the pipeline, as well as the content on the website come alive. I want to also take the time to introduce our panelists very briefly, two of whom are board members, and we're very excited to have them here. Dr. Barbara Mahon, who's the Deputy Director of Surveillance and Epidemiology at the Gates Foundation, as well as a pediatrician and infectious diseases epidemiologist. It's actually been a pleasure. I've known Barbara for a very long time in many, many different roles, including when we were both in government. Dr. Wilmot James, who's a senior advisor to the Pandemic Center and a professor of practice of health services policy and practice at Brown University School of Public Health and the Pandemic Center. And Dr. James is also a prior South African parliamentarian. In addition to Dr. Mahon and Dr. James, I want to also acknowledge Dr. Leo Liu, who is both a prior, who's also a senior advisor, but also a board member. So even though he's not on the panel, I just wanted to acknowledge the contributions that Dr. Liu has made. And then last but not least, another favorite person of mine who is online virtually today, Dr. Lurie, who's the Executive Director of Pandemic Preparedness and Response at CEPI, which is a coalition of epidemic preparedness innovations, and she's the CEPI's US Director. So with that, I yield the floor and the mic finally to John. Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you so much. It's great to be with you and be part of this launch of this amazing platform, Beacon. What we're going to do in this next hour is drill a little bit more deeply. I mean, we've heard some of the reasons why we developed Beacon, why there was a need for a platform like this. But I think it's important to hear from some amazing leaders in the field of public health, what the context is, why we've focused in this space, what the needs are, what the gaps are, and where the opportunities lie. All right, so starting over a little bit again so the people on Zoom can hear me. So we are going to drill a little bit more deeply today. We obviously heard the amazing reasons for why we built Beacon, but we're going to go into a little bit of context. We have three amazing public health luminaries here today. They're going to talk about some of the challenges of public health surveillance, some of the issues of data sharing, some of the opportunities that lie ahead, especially in this very complicated geopolitical time. So we're going to drill right into it because we want to hear from our amazing panelists, Dr. Wilmot James, Dr. Barbara Mahon, Dr. Nicole Lurie. So, oops, now I'm quite loud. Okay. All right, so going right into it. We've made major strides in biosurveillance, but as we saw during the pandemic, COVID-19 and mpox, critical blind spots remain in data, in speed, and trust. So let's get into that specific area. Dr. Mahon, let's start with you. From your perspective at the Gates Foundation, what are the most persistent gaps that you're seeing in global disease surveillance?
Yeah. So maybe I can say first that we're talking here about surveillance for early warning of infectious disease threats. You know, there's lots of other surveillance issues that are important, but that's not what's on the table here today. I think we heard a lot during COVID-19 about the cycle of panic and neglect, where an emergency happens, lots of funds become available, public health organizations have struggled to even spend all those funds. They ramp up, they make great plans, and then the funds disappear. People get laid off, programs get stopped. And there was a lot of talk early in the pandemic about how, you know, well, with this one, the cycle of panic and neglect is going to end because we see how important it is to sustain funding for public health activities. And I think many of us thought, not sure, that's the way it's going to go. And of course, indeed, we have seen the wheel turn back around. So I think when I think about gaps, the first gap I think of, and this is for almost every country in the world, is a gap in sustained funding, sustained resourcing for public health activities. But then from the Gates Foundation perspective, we focus on low and middle income countries. There are very significant gaps in the ability to detect new threats, report them, respond to them. And I should say that a huge amount of progress has been made, in laboratory systems, genomics, epidemiology, ability to investigate outbreaks, data systems, et cetera. When the new clade of Mpox emerged in Eastern DRC, it was African labs that sequenced that and that made that information available to the world. That wouldn't have happened some years ago. So a lot of progress has been made, but especially in the environment of reduced support, and this is of course reduced support from the US, but also from other donors, that really is a headwind for continued progress on all of those dimensions of laboratory capacity, epidemiologic capacity, communications capacity, data analytics, ability to report, et cetera.
Well, so you mentioned resource-limited settings. And so obviously that is a big challenge when we think about surveillance. And of course, we're talking today about Beacon, but more broadly talking about informal sources, new emerging sources of data that aren't generally thought of in traditional ways of public health surveillance. So Wilmot, I just want to talk to you about, where do you think the potential gaps could be filled by these types of sort of non-traditional sources? Where are the opportunities with tools like Beacon and others?
Well, let me just say that it was mentioned earlier that what you require for AI applications is really good data. Yeah. And so, and you can build a training based on that. So, and it took Google's Gemini $178 million to build its model of investment. And that's obviously a private company and what have you, and it's an investment that they make in that. So, and what Beacon is doing is providing that free, right? And so the capability for generating data that can be used for early warning and early detection to get to the signals is actually generated as a public good. And that's a massive contribution. And it's a massive contribution generally, but it's particularly a huge contribution in the developing world. So I do most of my work on the African continent. There are 55 countries on the African continent. If you look at what we are capable of doing today, compared to 10 years ago in terms of understanding spread and also mitigating disease outbreaks, it's quite remarkable what has happened. But we're still faced with major problems. And what are the problems? Inequality in terms of infrastructure, especially tech infrastructure. If you want an interoperable system across borders, you need to have a technological backbone for that. And that doesn't exist, and so you need investments. In tech, you also need to have an ability to, in fact, share data, require a sharing protocol. You need to train your people in terms of the modern bioinformatics required to maintain the systems and so on. So those are all challenges. And in order to get access, some level of equity around access, you need to have national governments who are in the end are the main actors to actually invest in their own systems. And what has happened with the US withdrawal has just revealed a well-known gap, which is to say too many developing countries depend on the WHO for their own health systems, and they depend on outside donors to do it. And it's simply not sustainable. So this is the moment to, in fact, deal with that particular issue. And so that, to answer the question directly, Beacon is a great example of an investment by an independent entity that is trustworthy, and it will develop trust in the course of time, more of that, to generate the kind of data that's required for early warning and early detection systems and for surveillance. And that's a huge contribution. So I'm very happy to be part of it, I must say. It's a really a great enterprise.
Thank you. Okay, maybe this is a little better. Nicole, can you hear us? Can you hear it? Okay, great. So I want to bring you into the conversation. Obviously, we're talking about the value of these kinds of data, and we're very excited, and there's a lot of hype, but I think it's still worth sort of thinking about whether we're over-relying on these sources. What, so obviously it fills a gap, but there is a danger possibly in over-relying on these sources, and what can't they solve without robust state-led efforts? Love your thoughts on that.
Well, great question, and maybe to set a little bit of context, let's remember that Beacon is being launched after a couple of other historic pieces have come into place. One is the IHR renewal, and the other is the Pandemic Accord, both of which have a lot of provisions for data sharing and reporting and all of those things. And I think that's important to recognize, but I don't think that either of those alone really solve the problem. I think in general, the world has kind of relied on this push-pull of informal data sources and reporting and country reporting for a long time. Sometimes the informal sources are great, but they need to be verified. And you get a terrible problem with sort of this signal to noise thing, because there's not a good way to figure out signal to noise. And I think Beacon has the potential to really, really help with that. On the other hand, there are lots of times that there are big disincentives for countries to report until things are really, really verified, because it can impact their economy, because it can cause panic, because of all those sorts of things. And so I sort of view that this is sort of a push-pull thing that sort of helps to strengthen countries' interpretation of what might be going on with these signals, and potentially strengthen their resolve to reporting when that needs to happen. So I think it has the opportunity to be transformational in terms of some of the geopolitical aspects of the way new outbreaks are communicated, and to cut down on the false alarms.
Yeah. Thank you. So I want to turn to a different topic. So obviously a lot of what we're doing today is talking about large language models, opportunities around AI. We didn't really get into some of the challenges. Obviously, when you deploy these tools, you have challenges of hallucinations, you have bias, you have various concerns with these models. So this is why, of course, with Beacon, we have a very strong human component. But of course, many groups and organizations are thinking about deploying these tools actively. And I think some of your organizations are using these tools and actively investing in them. So maybe I'll go back to Nikki. How is CEPI thinking about the deployment of AI tools into preparedness and response? What are you cautious about as you're thinking about the rollout of AI in the work that you do at CEPI?
Well, great. Well, CEPI is really focused on the 100-day mission, number one, which is being able to get a vaccine from the point that you recognize a pathogen is really dangerous to some level of authorization for use in 100 days. If you're going to do that, it means, first of all, you need really early signals, and they need to be verified enough so that you start vaccine development, right? In some way, shape, or form. You can always start and then decide it's really nothing and you can stop, but you don't want to do that a ton of times. On the other hand, we are now in CEPI using AI in some very different ways. We're going to count on systems like Beacon and spillover to help give us a sense of how worried should we be in the outset. But then AI tools are being used in very exciting ways to design new vaccines, to design new antigens, right? Hopefully that are better than what they call the wild type, what occurs in nature. And with AI, you can actually design these things and test these things much more quickly and have a sense of whether they are likely to work so that you want to take them into a vaccine, into animal testing, into human testing. And you can shorten that whole time period dramatically. Or if you get a signal that, don't worry, you haven't lost a lot and you can stop.
Right, absolutely, and we're seeing so much innovation, especially in the drug discovery realm right now. In fact, there was a meeting exactly last week talking about some of these opportunities. Maybe I'll talk to Wilmot now, because you're doing a lot of work, obviously, at the Pandemic Center, wondering how AI is being built into some of the early detection frameworks and risk assessments that you're thinking about at the Pandemic Center, Brown, which we have good representation here from today.
We host to a project called AWARE, which is Advanced Warning and Response Exemplars. And it is an effort to develop forward-leaning platforms for early warning and early detection system that include looking at climate variables. So it's a kind of policy-oriented and forward-leaning. And there are 4 countries involved in the study: Vietnam, Brazil, Kenya, and South Africa. And what we've established so far, just on the technology side, is that there's a really uneven use of the technology required for example, cloud applications. So that in the South African case, there's nothing in the cloud, and in Brazil there's some. So let's call it sort of cloud hesitancy in countries other than investment, but there's actually a resistance to it in some quarters.
Because of data security? Or?
Yes, and also just not enough knowledge among decision makers. And in fact, a lack of buy-in on the part of the politicians involved in the decision making on a ministerial level. So the challenge is, in fact, we really need to get buy-in from the politicians and decision makers. And there you have to solve the question around data sharing and sort of data security. But just to say, from that study, there are other issues that have come up, is that the technology side, you need cloud applications to just charge up your ability to generate the right analytics. And so all of those applications, in fact, can help enormously in speeding up a whole range of issues around surveillance, early detection, early warning, and the processing of data, and essentially the generation of insights that are required in real time in order to actually act. So we can map out what's required, and what you need is the actual technology to be in place. That's one thing, and then you need to be able to train in real time in a continuous education fashion what's required, for example, in the bioinformatics side. So you need that as well.
Okay, so I'm going to turn to Barbara here, and same topic, but slightly different angle. You've been involved in many levels of public health throughout your career, so you have good insight. Where are you seeing the use of AI right now? Is it happening? Of course, we're in a time when public health funding is challenging, so you'd think that bringing these tools could help fill some of the challenges that exist in terms of potentially workforce or an overburdened public health workforce. What are you seeing currently?
Yeah.
Is it happening, and what is it going to take to make that sustainable?
Yeah, I think it's starting to happen, and I think there's one of the headwinds is that, again, public health resourcing is never strong, and so that's a bit of a headwind for in the U.S. as well as in other countries. I think that in the U.S., CDC is starting to, for instance, use AI around looking for vaccine safety signals. So that's great. I expect that that's going to grow. I think so. I spend most of my time, like Wilmot does, working with partners in Africa, and there, I think we're also hearing both a lot of excitement about the potential and the same kind of worry that Yvonne was talking about. and the same kind of hesitancy from some leaders. At the same time, there's enthusiasm from other leaders. So earlier this month, there was an AI summit. I think it was called Global AI Summit for Africa in Rwanda. Yep. And several of my colleagues from the foundation went there. I heard that I think the expectation was that maybe 700 plus or minus people would attend, and then there were more than 2,500 who ended up showing up, with more, sort of on a waiting list or turned away. So certainly speaking to the enthusiasm. And this wasn't just about health or public health, it was on, broad AI applications for Africa. And I think there's a recognition of the potential for driving economic growth, as well as for specific applications like the one we're talking about here today. And at the same time, concern that AI not stand for advancing inequality. Right. And so when we think about some of the things that in the very low resource context especially need to be supported to take advantage of the potential of AI, it's like Wilmot said, infrastructure, compute, the ability, like high-speed communications are essential. There's also languages. Africa has something like 2,000 languages, and Beacon's already, I think, in 12, Nahid said, and more on the way, which is great. But supporting that continued ability to, ingest information in languages other than the first ones that we've gotten to, and also to communicate in those languages. That's another piece. And then the third is just, I think there's the data. If you're talking about health, detecting health events, there's a very significant limitations in access to healthcare and in diagnostics. And so where does that data come from in those low resource settings that feeds the models, that helps them give context-specific, unbiased answers? So all of those are things that the foundation is thinking about, and many, many others who are working in this area are thinking about now.
Well, I'm going to add one more element, and this is to anybody who wants to answer it. I mean, so we're involved in deploying AI in our health system, and we think about responsible, fair use of AI that doesn't necessarily favor some populations over others. When we think about AI in an outbreak setting, who's defining that? Where is the responsibility going to be? We know that is true in a health system. We have a committee and we have an ability to evaluate, like in an outbreak setting, where does that exist? Who's helping define that and monitoring that AI tools are actually acting in the best interest of everyone?
You're still looking at me.
Yeah, I'm sorry, but I'm looking. I'll look at. I have a harder time looking at the screen. Fine. But I'm looking at Nikki too.
I will say I have a couple of thoughts on this, and they don't fully cover the question. So one thought is that I think it's essential, as Beacon has done, to have humans be part of the workflow. And I also worry a little bit because I think about other technologies, which when they first came along, I thought, well, GPS is great, but I'm going to still have my map. Well, I don't use a map anymore. I feel like that's something that we are going to need to be very careful about. So I guess that's, I think, one part of the answer. But I don't feel like I guess, there's lots of different ways that AI could be used, and presumably for an outbreak that is more local, more, less heterogeneous, that may be simpler. But if you're talking about something bigger, affecting multiple populations, where models may be, the bias may be sort of differential in terms of its impact, I think that's still a challenge that, you have to fix.
Yes. Okay. Anybody else you want to take?
Yeah. So if I could make 2 points.
Okay.
The first is that, so let's see, we speak about migrating, in the case of Beacon, from human health to having a One Health framework, which of course is important. If you look at Africa as a continent, there's no surveillance of wildlife, for example, very little. If you have a surveillance system for infectious disease outbreaks, that's one thing. If you have it for pathogens, that's another. If you have it for disease vectors, that's quite another. So you know the bat that is a host to the Marburg virus, the Rosetta's bat, there's a need for a surveillance system over the migration pattern of that, for example. So expanded to a One Health framework to include that. That's a big challenge that sits there. So I think we should think much more broadly in terms of how we frame the factors that in fact involve. And the Rosetta's bat is very interesting, obviously. It hibernates in caves, and with temperature increases, that pattern is shifting. If you look at rainfall patterns and food security for the bats, you can see the migration patterns shifting. And Rwanda has been really at the leading edge of actually looking at surveillance systems for disease vectors as well, in addition to just infectious diseases, which is of course important. So, so just to make that particular point.
Thank you.
The second point is around governance frameworks, which is a very important question. And so governance frameworks have been developed. They, in part, inadequate, but you need global guidance on that. You need continental guidance on that. If you think of the continent of Africa, that guidance has to be provided by the Africa Center for Disease Control for the entire continent. And then, of course, individual countries have to subscribe to it in a way that matters. And that has to be introduced in order to have oversight of the particular questions you raise. But it's a huge challenge. I think the pandemic treaty has made some achievements, but there are still many weaknesses in it. But at least that's a good starting point to build out what I think should be, and I would suggest should be regional efforts in having data sharing agreements, for example, in place.
Great, thank you. We don't want to leave. Oh,
so
yeah, I was just going to turn to you, Nikki.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, it's okay. So I might maybe jump in a little more because there's so many different facets, obviously, of outbreak response where AI can play a role. And we've talked about the early warning. And for us at CEPI, we've talked about getting going early with vaccine development and deployment and understanding the needs, et cetera. But, you know, I think it's probably fair to say that I agree we need governance frameworks. I agree that they need to be country and regionally or continentally driven. But AI is going to play a role, whether people like it or not. And so that's where I think, first of all, the human interface is really important. And that secondly, the people who want to use it for decision-making and outbreak response, you know, whether it's where enhanced surveillance needs to be, and I'm so happy that Wilmot talked about the One Health as whether it's about where you deploy the resources or the countermeasures or how you do it, et cetera. You know, at every step of the way, there's both a role for AI and there's a role for the human interface and decision-making. So one of the other things that, in addition to the governance frameworks that I think are really important, is helping the people who have got to make the day-to-day decisions about the public health response understand what AI is, what it does and doesn't deliver, when to be skeptical, when to query it, when not to be query it, so they can make the best possible decisions that it can, because there's no reason to think that it's only going to deliver good information. The potential for it to disseminate incredible misinformation with malicious actors is just as great. So just raise that as, you know, as another challenge. But I think, you know, overall, it has the potential to make stuff a lot better and a lot faster and enhance decision-making and resource mobilization if done really well. Over.
Thanks, Nikki. Okay, so let's shift gears a little bit to funding. At least one funder in the room, but you know, obviously it's a shifting funding landscape to say the least right now. Obviously, it's fluctuating. There's a lot of volatility. We're all experiencing that in a significant way. So maybe if it's okay, I'll start with you, Barbara. You know, where do you think the biggest investment gaps are right now? You know, there's genomic surveillance, data sharing, frontline training. You know, how is this new reality influencing how the Gates Foundation is thinking about its investments right now?
Yeah, there's, I think everybody who is anywhere close to our field is thinking about this a lot right now. You know, I go back to the sort of foundation of like, what is public health surveillance for? It's for having information to make good decisions to protect people. And there's lots of stuff lots of surveillance information or information that's available that is sometimes included with surveillance information that's interesting, but isn't necessarily that actionable. So I think that one thing that's happening right now is really thinking very carefully about what is actually needed for decision-making. Now, that decision-making is generally governmental decision-making. It's public health authorities making recommendations for their populations. And so in that sense, it is inherently governmental. At the foundation, we think about, what's an appropriate role? How can we be as helpful as possible? And the place where we think we can really make a difference is in making investments in innovative technologies or in potentially catalytic approaches that are perhaps out of reach for governments or other to be done through markets, and to demonstrate what works, and then to make that information available so that others can take it to scale. So in the current environment, we're thinking a lot about, okay, what sort of discussions can we help to convene? What sort of tools could we help to develop to help bridge to what this new world is going to look like? We are not in a position, even if we wanted to be able to, fill the gaps that are being left. I mean, they're orders of magnitude higher than our payout, as high as our payout is. But we think that by really focusing on where we have comparative advantage, innovation, catalytic technologies, convening, that we can make our best contribution there.
Well,
So I'm not a funder. May I speak?
You may speak.
I mean, I know some funders, but
I'm sure everybody would like to know some funders right now. So yes, please.
So our current environment, which has all the characteristics that you're aware of in terms of defunding and the shrinking of resources, the estimate is that we will have 40% of what has been invested in global public health in 5 years' time. 40%, it's a massive cut. So we should get smart. I mean, that's easy for me to say, but you need to focus on what's essential. You need to prioritize, and you need to set up a system whereby national governments put more money into their own health systems. The current level of contribution is just too low. We've been going on about this for the last 10 years' time, and look where we are now today, a high level of vulnerability. So I think we should put a measurable system into place, a percentage of GDP or a percentage of, the way you used to do for R&D, where governments commit that and they have to put it into the health system. So that's the first thing. The second is, and I have to sort of articulate this very sort of carefully, is that we have to, in fact, prioritize. And in a resource-strained environment, I believe the best thing to do is to invest in early detection systems. That is, you know what you're looking for, you know what that pathogen looks like, and what you do is identify it quickly and set up a system where you can respond to it. Early warnings are far more expensive. It's about risk, assessment of risk, and so on. Is for every country to, in fact, say, we need to invest very carefully in priorities where we can actually solve this problem. And in my estimation, that's about early detection systems. And you build early warning systems as you go along. That's the immediate thing. And I would say a third thing is governments are not organized to, in fact, have a One Health response system. They're just not organized in that way. So there's a need for government reform. In the case of South Africa, which I know quite well, data is being collected for animal health, one silo, human health, another silo, environmental health, another silo, non-proliferation data sits in the Department of Trade and Industry, another silo, climate data sits in the South African Weather Service, and they are not integrated in the right way. So you need to, in fact, reform the way in which governments operate. So it's the third thing you can tackle. That will cost money, but that is a national issue, and they can get global support for it in terms of advice and what have you. So there's some things that can be done. And we often don't need Rolls Royces, we need Toyotas that are good systems, you know. You don't need some of these high-end expensive laboratories. You know, by the high containment ones are very expensive to maintain. You build them, it's great, but if you can't maintain them, you're actually wasting a massive resource.
What do you suggest instead?
I'm sorry?
Instead, what?
Instead, you don't need a biosafety level.
Yeah.
For one, in the same kind of way, you need a kind of a new lab. You can, operating at biosafety level 3+ level, and you can in fact have a less expensive lab put in place that does the same thing. You're not compromising in quality. It's not second rate. It's entirely possible.
Okay.
And can I add again?
Yeah.
And with molecular approaches to pathogen detection, often the first step is to deactivate everything. So you don't need to have a BSL even 3, let alone BSL-4 lab to identify whether a pathogen is there if the sample's rendered harmless before you test it. The other point that came to my mind while Wilmot was talking is I feel like the current situation has really revealed the downside of donor-driven, mostly vertical, disease-specific funding. And I remember, again, in the beginning of COVID, where the machines that were needed for COVID diagnosis were already present in most countries, but they were there for HIV, and they were not allowed to be used for COVID diagnostics. Now that eventually got worked out, and they were eventually able to be used for COVID diagnostics, but that kind of verticalization where, you know, an expensive machine can only be used for a specific virus, like that has to stop. And that goes, I mean, that's a really clear example, but it goes, cuts across lots of other systems as well, which are currently or have been verticalized, disease specific, but could be integrated, multi-pathogen, multi-purpose at a probably, you know, substantial savings.
Well, Nikki, I would like to bring you into the conversation around funding. Also, maybe if you're open to it, to talk a little bit about the spillover program, which CEPI, of course, supports, and getting to that, because I think this audience would really be interested to learn a little bit more about what you're doing there.
Yeah, sure. No, I think on the funding piece, I mean, this situation has obviously forced everybody to sit up and take a hard look. And I think I'm seeing two different kinds of camps. One is gosh, we have to fight as hard as we can and try to build back what was just destroyed. And the other being, gosh, we really need to do things very differently. And I think one of the things that we talked about with AI, that Barbara just talked about, you know, with new diagnostic technologies that Wilma talked about, is there are a ton of opportunities to do things very, very differently. Whether they're going to get us to the end state we need is a really critical question. But I think defining the essential pieces of the end state we need is going to be really central to getting there. I just listened to Wilmot talk about these 5 different, you know, strands of data that exist. They do in the US too. But AI tools could bring them together and analyze them in really, really different ways that then help you make different kinds of decisions and may or may not lead to different ways the government is organized as a result. So I just want to challenge us to be as creative as we can in this really, really, really difficult time, and spend at least as much time on the creativity aspect as we do on the fighting back aspect. I think is what I might say for right now. You know, with regard to spillover, I think we're really excited about this because the project that helps us understand spillover, potential spillover risk and its implications is central to the work that we are doing in the different viral families. And so, you know, CEPI has embraced the viral family approach, first pioneered by NIH and then also embraced by WHO, and are trying to develop prototype vaccines for the different viral families. And as I talked about before, we use all different kinds of AI tools to think about how to make better vaccines. But integrating spillover with Beacon sort of gives us a really different kind of sense of, okay, you've got this early warning, you've got now a bunch of curated data, which is really, really helpful. How do you then really think about another well-trained system to think about, well, what really is the risk, right?
Yep.
And I hope that it's really going to help us sort of calibrate the guardrails between a little bit the overreaction and the underreaction. But I think, as everybody has pointed out, especially Nahid, no matter what you do, you got to have a human being interpret this data. You can't just say, hey, the spillover risk is really high and you're really worried about, the signals you're getting. We need to jump into something. You really have to do that validation. You have to do the human data element of it. And think about a just recent example with, the Oropouche outbreaks in both Latin America and on the African continent. If I just sort of looked at the first pass at the viral family stuff, the risk was pretty low in those models initially. I think they're getting trained to do better now. But if you just sort of took that at face value, you might not do anything. And maybe you don't need to do anything, but maybe from my perspective, there are really early steps in vaccine development that you got to do. So when that risk goes up, you're ready because you've acted on those early signals. And I think particularly acting on the early signals is something that integrating spillover and Beacon is really going to help with. Same thing goes on the diagnostic side, by the way. Yeah, and probably therapeutics. Yeah.
Great, thanks, Nikki. Okay, well, I know there are probably some questions out there. We have more questions that we can get into, but are there questions from the audience? Anybody online, Cassandra? Anybody that wants to? This is an amazing panel, and so great opportunity to ask some burning questions that you may have. Anybody?
We have mics circulating, so raise your hand and we'll bring a mic to you. I will, if I could ask you the question that was asked Secretary Howe, which was excellent. How do you integrate all these different perspectives? And as Barbara, as part of the board, and Wilmot, you as well, work that we're doing is starting with the representations on the SME side, making sure that we have global representation on the SME side, and then having both a board as well as as a scientific and ethics committee that brings in different disciplines and different regional contexts. What advice would you give us to be a lot more inclusive in terms of backgrounds and in terms of disciplines? And this goes to you too, Nikki.
Well, I suppose you started by building global partnerships and have a sort of hub and spoke model for where your experts are actually located and how you draw them into the system. And if you look at the globe, if you partner up with at least 5 centers of excellence globally and find the resources to do that, and attract the science experts in those particular regions to work in those hubs as part of the spoke, then I think that could work. It sounds a bit abstract, but you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I might have an additional.
Go ahead, Nikki.
I might have just an additional idea, because I think, you're just feeling your way in this now. And so I think you have the opportunity to pilot, test, and have a look, to experiment and take a look. And, this whole sort of crowdsourcing citizen science movement is really interesting. And I think it can take you to some either very interesting places or some very dark places. But I think in terms of thinking about the different kinds of people you want to involve in this and the different kinds of expertise, I imagine that you could do some small tests and experiments to try to figure out what that gets you. I've been so impressed with, both the crowdsourcing and the global collaboration that happen around COVID and around COVID science, and brought so many more people into this. And I think because of internet connectivity, you can really democratize the kinds of inputs you get into this. And I would maybe wonder if, in addition to sort of having a board and a scientific advisors get you this information, think about the different kinds of end users that you might source that from to give you either ideas or specifics. Over.
And thanks, Nikki. I very much agree with where you're going with this. Nahid, I was impressed from the very first time we talked, which is now getting to be, I don't know, 6 or 9 months ago, quite a while ago, about Beacon, that you were thinking about this issue from the very start. And I think you've done a really good job of thoughtfully bringing in SMEs from around the world. And I know you're planning to continue to do more of that. You're setting up governance structures that are intended to encourage the right direction for the program. The thing that I would highlight is, it goes back to something I said earlier, which is that when you're talking about the lowest resource settings, there's such limited data. And so I think that the potential for bias is going to continue to be there because the information isn't coming from the areas with the least resources. And so I think that continuing to think about how do you screen for that, be aware for that, correct for that, I think that's going to be important, not only for Beacon, but for AI, many AI applications. But I do think that from, sort of baked in the way you've approached from the ground up building this program.
Yeah, and I forgot to highlight, one of the things that Barbara and I talked about at the very beginning was this idea that we would evolve, Nikki, exactly in this idea of multiple hubs, that we would partner with institutions around the world when we keep growing to have additional centers that do this in partnership with us, preferably in another time zone altogether. We have a couple of questions from the audience. We'll start there.
Hello, my name is Sinetti. So first of all, thank you all for hosting this conference and for your panel as well. My question is kind of related to the last point that you were all touching on. I'm studying international affairs and public health and specializing in Africa. And I know that a lot of you, or all of you actually mentioned the bias and the different maybe local problems that might need local solutions. So I was wondering if you had, continuing in that idea, any ideas or initiatives to include more local solutions. You mentioned the Oropoucha virus. So things that maybe might not touch us in Boston specifically, but might need more expertise from local innovators, whether it's in the AI space or in the health space.
Thank you. Want to take that?
Yeah, I think that's I heard that as a question for Beacon.
All right.
Is that right?
It can be for any of you.
Yeah.
Well, listen, I think for us, from a surveillance perspective, a lot of our work, of course, is focused on getting local context. Some of that is through getting access to local sources. So a lot of the work of HealthMap signaling, but also of the SMEs, is to get understanding of local news sources, local individuals that could report. So it's not just about coverage of national or international media. So a lot of our work is going forward is going to be about developing surveillance capacity, building a network, as Nahid said, centers of excellence in other parts of the world where there's a local understanding. That's been true for the work of informal sources for many years. A platform that doesn't have an understanding of what public health looks like on the ground is really only going to give you a very small amount of the story. And so from our previous experiencing, having local context, people that understand the cultural significance of certain words and certain settings, is critical to being able to provide the context. So that is something that we have defined from the outset as a critical area for Beacon, but it's also something that's actively that we're having to build as far as input into the system.
Yeah, I will also add that I'm going to put someone in this room on the spotlight who was not expecting it. Sam, who is part of my center is working on a Fogarty grant in Liberia with the University of Liberia for a partnership that we've had for 6-7 years. Sam's one of the PhD candidates that's going through BU who's based in that program. And one of the thoughts that we've had is a kind of partnership where you could use training programs, right, that are developing this incredible public health experts and use the AI as part of their training, use the AI use case as an introduction. And when you can have these kinds of global partnerships, like, between different universities, between different institutions, you're doing two things. You are creating that local exchange of knowledge, but you're also including the next generation potentially in building that kind of infrastructure.
Yeah. Do we have another question over there? Yeah.
Yes, thank you. This is a fabulous panel and asking a really important question, which is how you engage the periphery and the populations that don't have all of the resources sitting here in Boston. And in my experience, where we worked with Rwanda and Peru, and built in the connection between the telephones and the national disease surveillance system, and where people could use their phones to do very basic disease reporting. And it seems to me it would be incredibly important to follow up the question of how do you connect the periphery, the poorest regions, get information in, and it doesn't require AI in every health clinic, but how do we put that at the service of those health clinics and the people who are in the periphery? So both how do you get information in and how do you get it back, and how do you give the tools to people who need it and who are facing these things? Thank you.
Yeah, that sounded like an answer to the previous question, but I see that there's also a question in it. I mean, I think that other parts of the Gates Foundation are working a lot on AI for healthcare, right? Not for surveillance, but for healthcare per se. And I think that there's a real opportunity as those modern tools are developed to ensure that data flows from the healthcare setting to the public health setting for surveillance purposes. So yes to mobile phones, yes to other sorts of leapfrog technologies, and I think also yes to using new technologies in healthcare, and then but setting that up in a way that information flows to public health.
So there's a lot of, let's call it entrepreneurial energy on the African continent, for example, in the use of mobile phones for banking. It's a thriving business. And with a continent with such a high level of young people in the population, there is enormous interest in local participation in some of these bigger projects in ways that sometimes might surprise one. So I think there's that, and that energy should be tapped, and it can be. Just in terms of inviting entrepreneurial interest. The second is the use of the digital health platforms that can be localized and used for disease reporting and what have you, and there's a real potential for that. I must say, I mean, if you look at some of the leading countries in terms of the use of technology, would be Rwanda as one example. They just launched a health intelligence unit with support from the Gates Foundation. It's extraordinary what they've done in terms of being able to have connections into rural areas. Now, Rwanda's not the DRC in terms of geographical size, but that's one example of what can actually work.
Jerry.
Hi, this is Jerry Kirsch. I'm looking at you, Nikki. Hi. We live in a low trust era. And at the same time, the anti-vax, the anti-science, the anti-academic movements have money and organization and presence in the media and everywhere, in social media. The last 100 days have sucked the remaining oxygen out. what do we do to build trust? Trust in Beacon, that it's reliable, trust in the response, trust in the products, trust in our principles and our goals, because you can build the systems, and if there's no trust in the communities, you're nowhere.
May I tackle that question? So I was living in South Africa in the 1990s and was there at the time that at the moment of democratic freedom, we hit HIV and the country didn't know what to do with it. So Nelson Mandela was president. I was at the University of Cape Town at the time. We took a delegation to see him to ask him to declare a national emergency. It was before he actually stepped down and was replaced by Thabo Mbeki, who turned out to be a denialist and a dissident. And so we lived in the world of disinformation that had consequences. So the Harvard University study estimated that 300,000 South Africans died who didn't have to die, and a million children were orphaned. And I sat in Parliament. I was in the Health Committee in Parliament, and every year we had to set aside an enormous amount of money to deal with the consequences. Of course, we had a moral obligation to do that, but that money could have been spent on fixing hospitals if it wasn't for that. So disinformation and mistrust has enormous consequences in lives. And Nelson Mandela felt very badly about that. His son died of AIDS. And at the time, I was running 3 special projects with his office, and one of which was a request from him to get a global expert to come and give a lecture on the origin of AIDS. And I was given that task to do, so I invited David Baltimore to come, at the time president of Caltech. David came and he gave that lecture. And I tell you the story because it is of the greatest importance that there has to be a rebuttal to misinformation and to building trust. One of the things that happened in South Africa was a collaboration between citizens. In this case, it was an organization called the Treatment Action Campaign, run by somebody called Zaki Ahmad, who was HIV positive, and put together a citizens grouping in order to take government to court. And government was taken to court, and Thabo Mbeki was ordered to provide antiretrovirals in 2004. Citizen action, but a collaboration with the scientists in the country. So you had citizens and scientists collaborating against the government that spread disinformation. Does that sound familiar to you today in the US? So, and I say this just very seriously, it is of the greatest importance that Beacon as an entity puts out honest numbers constantly into the environment. And that is its purpose. It's to build trust in order to put out honest numbers of what's going on in terms of public health in the US and globally. And that honest numbers have to be trusted, and you have to build on it and expand it. And that becomes the basis of actually placing information in people's hands that they can use to protect their lives. I'm sorry to tell you that long story. I want to emphasize how fundamentally important it is in a society like the US, which is a democratic society being challenged by a government who actually spreads misinformation. That's what happened in South Africa under Thabo Mbeki. And with the power of the state behind it, I don't know what else to advise, but to just keep at it. Honest numbers into the public domain without fail. And I think Beacon is primed to do that.
So maybe I'll just jump in here. And as you brought this back, Wilmot, to Beacon, Jerry, your question as always is so profound and so broad reaching. But just bringing this back for a moment to Beacon, if you want to be honest and trusted, I think there are 2 other things that are really going to be essential. One is you need to be doing real-time surveillance for misinformation about Beacon and entities that might want to discredit it and discredit you. And you need to be on top of that, and you need to fight back, and you need to have ways to do it, even if it's bots that release the truth into the environment, right? But I don't think you get a pass on that if you want to do that. And the second is, I think that in times that you're wrong or you come to wrong assessments, you're open and transparent and very fast about both admitting that and explaining it, because those are the ways I think you build trust. The other pieces of this are a much longer conversation that don't deserve a little box on a Zoom screen. But those are two really concrete things that I imagine may already be built into your system. I'm sure the latter is, but if not, would just urge you to do that.
No, it's absolutely important. We need to build an AI to monitor the AIs that are talking about us. So the AI wars begin. Jerry, that could have been a whole session on itself with that question. So thank you. Yeah. I think we have time for one last question from online. Yeah.
Yes, we have one question from the online audience. Can the private sector reliably fill the gaps in disease surveillance where government efforts fall short? And is that a safe and sustainable solution for communities? We've seen this debated recently in contexts like NOAA, the Weather Service, where the answer often leans towards no. What lessons should we take from that?
I mean, I'm happy to start on that one because we've seen this movie before. There have been many commercial efforts that have started in the public health surveillance space. They've been very challenging. You know, the challenge of who pays, who wants to fund this work for profit. We've seen many companies start, and we've seen many companies fall as a result. And we've seen this every time companies emerge when there's a new pandemic, and those companies often go away. So in theory, it makes sense. There should be an opportunity in a market for innovations in public health and startups that want to do this work, but ultimately they get funded, venture comes in, and the ability to sustain is just challenged because of this cycle of funding that exists and the willingness to pay. So, you know, I'm very skeptical of that approach. Obviously, we're taking an approach that's slightly different as a nonprofit free system relying on public sources, but you know, there's of course opportunities for other types of vehicles as well. But I don't know, maybe others here have a thought on the role. I mean, the private sector can contribute data, of course, and support, and we can leverage the tools that they provide, but companies devoted to this space are more challenged.
So they've failed examples and they're successful examples. And I'm going to go back to Rwanda for having a very successful public-private partnership that Nikki can comment on as well, in terms of setting up a relationship between the National Health Department, the Biomedical Research Institute, and two companies. Ginkgo Bioworks, which is based in Boston, doing the wastewater surveillance at Kigali Airport, and Kivia doing the clinical trials. And then CEPI is also involved, but I won't speak on Nikki's behalf. But I mean, there are success stories, but it's difficult.
It's very difficult.
It's very difficult.
Even Ginkgo,
No. I mean, they are, you know, they have a responsibility to the shareholders.
It's very challenging.
So the question is, how do you find the proper match? But it's possible. Yeah.
Nikki, do you want to comment? No.
I don't think so. I mean, I think, you know, the whole story in Rwanda is really interesting and really important. I think what I would only say there is, you know, as Wilmot knows, I was very involved in the response to the Rwanda's Marburg outbreak, where, you know, working in public-private partnerships, we're able to get a vaccine that had been developed with BARDA funding, but to Rwanda and get a trial stood up and get people vaccinated starting 9 days into it. But I think the thing that impressed me the most, and I'm going to contrast this with some other recent outbreaks, is that every single day the Minister of Health got up and he went on television and he told people what was happening and he explained to people the situation, and they put numbers out there every single day, and they really, for the most part, didn't hide stuff from the public. It was incredibly transparent. I will contrast that with Tanzania, that didn't admit that it had a recent outbreak, with Uganda, that decided maybe it would report on Sudan Ebola virus every 2 weeks, right? And with some areas now, potentially, you know, we're looking at what's going to happen now with the chikungunya outbreaks, and to look at, you know, how transparent they will be. The thing I was struck with Rwanda, with the health minister, is that the population also had an incredibly high degree of confidence in him and in the government. And kind of, maybe as a result, maybe it's not cause and effect in vaccines. And the vaccination rates and vaccination uptake were very high. So that tells us something, I think, about some of the preconditions for trust, but I don't think it tells us everything.
Yeah. Well, okay. I have a mile long of questions I could keep asking you. This has been an incredible panel. We're so lucky to have all three of you here. So please give a round of applause. Great panel. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I could spend another few hours talking to all of those panelists and John about the things that are going on today. But we have an incredible end to the program. As you know, we previously had reported that Africa CDC Director General Jean Kaseya would be able to join. Unfortunately, we heard, as you can understand, he has been otherwise detained with other meetings. So we would like to welcome instead a hometown hero, I would like to call him, Dr. Robert Goldstein, who is the Massachusetts Department of Public Health's commissioner. He oversees the public health workforce of over 3,200, an expansive department responsible for a range of programs, including environmental health, infectious diseases, injury prevention, maternal health, and child health. In addition, the department licenses health professionals, health facilities, and impact public health, and operates state public health laboratory and 4 public health hospitals. Dr. Goldstein was appointed as commissioner by Governor Maura Healey in April 2023. Previously, he served as a senior policy advisor at the CDC, where he focused on public health emergency response, infectious diseases, and the CDC's strategic policy initiatives. Trained in infectious diseases with a specialty in HIV treatment prevention, Dr. Goldstein has focused his clinical work on providing care to those who live at risk for HIV. His experience for caring for patients drives his academic and policy pursuits, identifying and working to eliminate barriers. I will say this from personal experience. I want to echo that. When Robbie was a senior policy advisor at the CDC, I was a senior policy advisor at the White House, and we would be on Zoom calls a lot. And Robbie is someone who is data-driven, but with that data-driven, passion-driven. Passion for response, passion for equity. And I was so happy that Massachusetts got to then take advantage of his leadership since his return back. He also holds a BS and MD and PhD from Tufts. He's the only other triple jumbo I have met. So I did a BS MALD and MD at Tufts. He completed his residency and training in internal medicine at MGH, where he served as a chief resident, and he completed his infectious diseases training at MGH, Brigham and Women's Infectious Diseases Program. Robbie, thank you so much.
All right. I think the slides are going to come up. Is that right? There we go. Okay, perfect. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for inviting me here to be with you at what I really consider to be a pivotal moment for public health. I think there are many who look at where we are right now in public health and they see fear, they see restriction, and they see loss. I see where we are as a moment for vision, a time for innovation, and an opportunity for boldness. So as we witness the introduction of Beacon, this remarkable biothreats emergence analysis and communications network, we celebrate a system that's born out of the lessons of the past crises and is built to meet the urgency of the as yet unknown but inevitable challenges that will lie ahead. So I was given a sneak peek of Beacon recently, and I was really grateful for the opportunity to see the power of this network in action. It's an extraordinary tool. It's one that will empower those of us in public health to be increasingly timely and more effective. And I realized that I just called Beacon a tool, and that term really shortchanges the power of this effort. Beacon is so much more than a tool. It's more than a platform. It is more than a program. Beacon is really a promise. It's an investment in the idea that knowledge, information, observations, and data shared early and acted upon swiftly can change the course of an illness or a potential outbreak, or even history. This is public health at its best. It's collaborative, innovative, global, rooted in the understanding that our health and our well-being are interconnected across people, species, borders, systems, and disciplines. With Beacon, for the first time, we'll have an open source, real-time global surveillance system that links public health researchers, health agencies, clinicians, and the public to rapidly share information about emerging threats to humans, animals, plants, and the environment. It will enable us to detect sentinel cases, identify clusters, and act before outbreaks spiral into disasters. We need this kind of robust surveillance warning and informational system. And I think it's fitting that Beacon is launching around the 5-year anniversary of the start of the COVID-19 pandemic. 5 years since much of the world ground to a halt, a time when we saw firsthand just how fragile our systems really were. COVID showed us in devastatingly blunt detail the costs of delay, the cost of fragmented data, the costs of misinformation and mistrust. COVID also showed us what's possible when we prioritize and we mobilize science and expertise in the face of urgency. Efforts like Beacon are motivated by the belief that sharing knowledge quickly and acting on it decisively will save lives. We learned important lessons from the COVID pandemic. I learned important lessons from many in this room. And we, as a society, are not taking these lessons and moving ahead as forcefully as many of us have hoped. Instead, we're seeing troubling signs. Public health funding is shrinking. Global surveillance is being curtailed. Critical programs are being cut, data are being censored, our workforce, already stretched thin, is being asked to do more with less. And perhaps most alarming, trust in science and in the institutions that protect health is eroding. mRNA technology, once heralded as a medical miracle, is now a target of skepticism. Measles is back in communities where vaccination rates have dropped below herd immunity thresholds. And around the world, disinformation spreads faster than any pathogen. We must work to rebuild trust. And the way we do that is through innovation, transparency, integrity, action, results, and communication. And that's where Beacon comes in. The system not only picks up on pathogens, it detects patterns. It not only issues alerts, it invites collaboration. It's not only for scientists and experts and public health officials, it's for the public. Beacon needs everyone to contribute the kind of information and insights that fuel its power, and in turn, Beacon will benefit everyone. As we build the technology and the systems to advance health and prevent disease, it's interesting to note that we're continuing a tradition of innovation that has shaped our nation, a tradition that started right here in Massachusetts. Last weekend, here in Massachusetts, we celebrated the 250th anniversary of the start of the American Revolutionary War. 250 years since Paul Revere's ride and the shot heard round the world. And we all know that the Revolutionary War was a fight for freedom. We should also all know that it was a fight against disease. In 1775, just as the Continental Army was mobilizing, Boston was gripped by an outbreak of smallpox, an insidious and devastating adversary that threatened to decimate the patriots poised to secure liberty. In fact, during the course of the 8 years of the Revolutionary War, more than 25,000 Continental Army soldiers perished. 2/3 of these casualties were attributed to disease, primarily smallpox, not bullets or bayonets or cannonballs. In a time before antibiotics, when medical knowledge was rudimentary, the crowded camps, unsanitary conditions, and close quarters that promoted the spread of disease proved to be far more lethal than the British Army. Fortunately, one leader recognized the true scope of this viral threat. General George Washington, himself a smallpox survivor, understood the devastation that would occur if this deadly virus continued to march through the ranks of his army. He made a bold, controversial, and visionary decision. He ordered the inoculation of his entire army against smallpox. This was a gamble. The inoculation process was new, it was misunderstood, it was considered dangerous. It was unproven on such a mass scale. Many feared that introducing material from a smallpox lesion directly into the scratch on a healthy person's skin would backfire, and it would result in more disease and more death. But Washington was prescient, and he was desperate. He understood back then what we in public health now know. The cost of inaction is often greater than the risk of intervention. In a letter to Dr. William Shippen Jr., Director General of Hospitals of the Continental Army, General Washington wrote, I quote, "Necessity not only authorizes but seems to require the measure. For should the disorder infect the army in the natural way and rage with its usual virulence, we should have more to dread from it than from the sword of the enemy." The decision to vaccinate, which was grounded in evidence, albeit limited and primitive evidence, and was grounded in courage, may have changed the course of the war. It preserved the strength of the Continental Army, and perhaps more than any single battle, this action furthered the dream of a new nation. The moments echo now. The decisions we make today about surveillance, prevention, and preparedness, the decisions about public health, will shape the freedom, safety, and health of generations to come. And there's another part of this story too. Paul Revere, the brave rider who rallied the troops in their fight for liberty, resistance, and hope, dedicated his intellect and his patriotism to public health. After the war, he took up the cause of fighting disease. In 1799, he became Boston's first health officer and the first to hold this position in any jurisdiction in the new nation. The silversmith turned patriot helped develop early disease control strategies. He implemented quarantine protocols. He educated the public about the health benefits of good hygiene. And he laid the groundwork for our modern public health system. So in some ways, we can trace the lineage of Massachusetts-based public health innovations, of Beacon itself, all the way back to Paul Revere. And I can't help but pause here and acknowledge this lesser-known chapter about the silent enemy of the Revolutionary War and the beginnings of public health in our nation. These stories are more than just a footnote in history. They remind us of why we do this work, the power and the importance of diseases in changing our history. They remind us that the fight for freedom has always included the fight for health and safety. These stories show us that leaders like Washington and Revere need to do more than stand strong against enemies. They must also stand strong against public doubt, fear, and controversy to protect our nation's freedom and to save lives. The birth of our nation 250 years ago depended on what was considered an unpopular, misunderstood, misrepresented medical intervention. History, it would seem, echoes through the centuries. Today, we're facing similar battles. Vaccine skepticism is rising, public health is politicized, misinformation dominates the news, and the lessons from centuries ago still stand. Science, when backed by vision and courage, saves lives. Public health, from surveillance to vaccination to programmatic intervention, is an investment in the health and well-being of ourselves, our families, and our communities. It's a civic responsibility. It's how we honor the legacy of Washington and Revere, how we can uphold their vision of a resilient and healthy nation. Public health is in many ways a modern act of patriotism. The shot heard around the world 250 years ago was not solely from a musket. It also came from a resolute general who chose inoculation over inaction. And in his choice, he made a promise to create a nation, to protect its people, and to guarantee independence, unity, and hope. Today, public health, the work that we all do in this room, is one important way that we keep that promise alive. My own journey into medicine and public health was also shaped by history, more recent history, and it was inspired by another public health crisis, the early days of HIV/AIDS. As a teenager and a young adult, I was horrified and fascinated by the continuous news reports about a mysterious, deadly illness that was spreading infection, as well as stigma. Young people, particularly gay men, people who use drugs, and those who receive blood transfusions, were dying at alarming rates. Treatments were non-existent, misinformation was rampant, fear was high, and so was discrimination. Physicians who tried in vain to treat the deadly illness faced daunting challenges. Patients were presenting with rare infections and cancers, and the top scientists were struggling to understand what was happening. The sense of helplessness, the urgent need for answers, and the compassion required to care for those affected left a profound impression on me. And so did the power of disease detection. 5 young men, all active homosexuals, were treated for biopsy-confirmed pneumocystis carinii pneumonia, an alert put out to the world with the best technology we had at the time. That drove discovery. It gave clinicians and public health practitioners around the world the knowledge they needed to manage the public health threat in front of them. That ping, as we'd call it today, in the MMWR awoke a generation of scientists, and it altered the course of our history. It also drove my development as a medical student and a young physician, and it pushed me to devote my career to identifying, deciphering, and fighting infectious diseases. While initially focused on caring for those with HIV, my experiences have stretched far beyond as new outbreaks, new mysterious diseases arose. As new pings caught my attention, working in infectious disease calls for being prepared to solve a problem, diagnose complicated symptoms, and deliver appropriate care for those affected by disease, sometimes a rare or unknown disease. The news we deliver can be terrifying and heart-wrenching. It is only with accurate and timely knowledge that we can deliver it in a way that is compassionate. In addition to HIV, since starting my journey into medicine and public health, I've been involved directly or indirectly with outbreaks of SARS, H1N1, MERS, Zika, COVID-19, Ebola, Mpox, and now H5N1. And despite the gray in what is in the hair that remains, I'm actually not that old. Each of these pings went off like a siren, calling us all to the complicated work of public health and outbreaks. Collectively, these diseases have taught us one enduring truth. We cannot afford to be caught off guard. Individually, each of these diseases has provided us with new and vital information that we can apply to the next outbreak, and the next, and the next. SARS showed us that a respiratory virus can travel across the globe in days. Zika demonstrated how vector-borne diseases can leave generational scars. COVID-19 taught us painfully what happens when our systems are too slow, our signals too siloed, our politics too fractured. Mpox reminded us that vigilance at the local level can prevent a national crisis. My friend and mentor, Dr. Nestle Basgaz, brilliantly diagnosed the first case in the United States, a rare moment when clinical excellence and public health's need for speed meet. And now H5N1 is a reminder that we can't wait for a virus to mutate into a human threat before we prepare for its arrival. And I need to sadly bring up one additional disease, one more outbreak, measles. It's back. A disease considered eliminated in the United States in 2000 has reemerged, fueled in large part by misinformation and mistrust. We know where this story can lead, and we must keep trying to rewrite the ending. Building back trust will be key to getting us back on track. And there's another player in this broader story, a new and complicated entry on the timeline that is changing where and how often the pings sound, and that's climate change. Today, we're watching the H5N1 virus closely, which so far has affected mostly those who work directly with dairy cattle and poultry workers. The human threat continues to be low, but we've learned that it's unwise to wait for viruses to mutate before preparing for a crisis. We see the major shifts as our region, our nation, our world warm up. Bird migration patterns are changing, potentially intensifying the spread of H5N1. Similarly, deer ticks are expanding their range quickly, bringing the threat of Lyme disease and other tick-borne diseases to areas that had no cases a decade ago. The Lone Star tick, once rare here in Massachusetts, is now appearing in greater numbers, along with cases of alpha-gal syndrome. This is all thought to be related to climate change, right? As all pathogens move and change with their environment so they can survive and thrive. Such sweeping changes call for sophisticated surveillance systems to identify, track, and warn about disease and the changes that affect health, safety, and well-being. And that brings us back to Beacon. Beacon is a way to help fill a critical gap in our global infectious disease awareness network. It's real-time, it's open source, and it's built to be equitable. Its combination of AI and large language models to track and alert us to outbreaks happening anywhere in the world is incredibly exciting and potentially game-changing. In the context of endemic or epidemic diseases, we often know what we're looking for. A very wise person once taught me, in the middle of the storm, you don't need to count the raindrops to know that it's raining. But in the world of emerging pathogens, as outbreaks flare and as viruses begin to mutate, we do need to count the raindrops. We need to know about each case, each presentation. Imagine an emergency department physician treating a patient who just returned from a trip overseas. That doctor obtains a travel history and symptoms, and Beacon alerts the provider to an outbreak in the region the patient visited. That single alert could mean the difference between an isolated case and a community cluster. With Beacon, a signal from a rural health worker in Southeast Asia can echo quickly across time zones and trigger action on the other side of the globe. It can connect labs with field teams, public health departments with hospitals, researchers with policymakers, and all of us with data and facts, and maybe even the answer. So today, as we celebrate this launch of Beacon, the giant leap forward it promises, we also need to honor the past, the many bold decisions that have been made in the best interest of health and the sacrifices of communities hit hardest by diseases. We look toward the future with the same sense of urgency and courage because we know the threats will keep coming. But now, with Beacon, so will our ability to see them sooner, understand them faster, and act upon them more decisively. Thank you very much.
Commissioner Goldstein, would you mind taking some questions?
I'm happy to.
Do we have any in-person questions? And if not, if there's an online question, we can start with that. Okay, Cassandra. Oh, we have a question here.
Thanks, that was really a great presentation. The last anecdote that you told brought to the surface, in my mind anyway, the tension between Beacon's global mission and the very local way in which it can act. When you think about trying to assemble support, attract especially financial support for something like Beacon, I think it's natural for an organization like the Gates Foundation to end up in everybody's crosshairs. Is there a local argument or an argument you could make to local stakeholders for the importance of Beacon?
Yes. Next question, no. Absolutely there is. And in fact, I had a conversation just yesterday with another state health officer, someone who has my role in a different state in this country, I won't name the state, where we agreed that it is now becoming the role of the State Department of Public Health to think globally. We don't have that partner that we used to have at the federal level. We can't look to the national agencies to provide us the funding to do the work and a guarantee that we'll receive the data that we had previously received. And so I do think it's time for states to step up, but we have to do it in the right way. No single state can take on the role of the federal government. The state can invest in its local researchers, in its local universities, in its academic networks to make sure that we're embedded, we're engaged, we're answering questions that are relevant to local public health, but we're doing this in a way that makes sense for the current moment. I came in just in the middle of the panel, but I was really struck by what Nikki Lurie said, that we don't need to just build back to what we had before. We have to think about new and innovative ways to do this. And I believe that includes local public health.
Any questions in the room? Any questions online? Okay. Commissioner Goldstein, I've been thinking a lot over this changing environment about exactly what you just ended with, which is this changing role of state and local public health departments. Can you make some predictions about both the opportunities and challenges that you may face? And regardless of the administration, this idea of, overall milieu of lack of trust, the vaccine hesitancy that you just spoke about.
Yeah, I'll start with trust because it's an area that I spend a lot of time thinking about, engaging in. I'm not surprised that people don't trust the federal government. I think if you read the news, if you are a citizen of this country, you recognize that it's really hard to trust the federal government in this moment. I do think that people still trust their states. It is not that people distrust government. They distrust what's coming out of the federal government. And states need to step up. And I think that in particular, public health in states needs to step up. I think it is our job to articulate in a way, the messages in a way that connect with the communities. We're really fortunate here in Massachusetts. I am very fortunate to be the commissioner of a Department of Public Health in a state that has the highest number of people with MDs, PhDs, MPHs, you name the advanced degree, we have them all here. And that means we get to communicate at a different level. And we also have folks here who need us to communicate in a different way so that they can understand what's happening. But I think that is best done in this moment by the states and not by the federal government because there are too many barriers. The challenge that we're going to have in doing that, and this is a challenge that's sort of writ large across state public health right now, is that work is expensive. And you could say, well, it's just the way that you go out and communicate and how much you're on TV and the types of commercials that you run about a vaccine, but it's really about embedding into communities and it's engaging in ways with local community-based organizations that they believe you're there for the right reasons. They know you're there for the right reasons. That is expensive work. And it is going to be really hard to do that work over the next 4 years when funding is being cut at the federal level. It's a struggle that we're having every day at the Department of Public Health, trying to figure out what is core public health. And I have made the argument many times that engagement, building trust is core public health, just as much, and I will say these are also important, but just as much as our state public health laboratory, just as much as our surveillance network, we have to also invest in trust, communication, and engagement.
Thank you. We have a question up front here.
Thank you so much for the presentation and the comments. One question is, we talked a lot about the role of AI, and AI relies on good quality data. And particularly in life sciences and in health sciences, there is not sort of a common place where you go and get the data, and oftentimes you have to interact with different hospital systems that have different rules. Do you see a role for the state to be a broker and a curator for data that could potentially be made available for research purposes?
I definitely see a role for the state, although I think the state needs to be really careful. People are nervous to share their data with the state for good reasons, right? And we're seeing what happens when you share data with the federal government right now, how that can be perverted into a political crusade and not into a mission to improve health. The state has to be at the table. We do collect data that are really critical to surveillance networks and are critical to the AI engine that is going to be underneath all of this. But I think we have to find a way to do this that's not just, please give the state all of your data so that we can hold on to it. This goes back to this trust conversation. People aren't going to be willing to do it. I think some folks may know, not everyone, there's a really, I think, great project that's coming out of Yale, the Yale School of Public Health, that is trying to engage with the medical record systems, mostly Epic and Cerner, to try to bring their data in and then share that back with the state so that there can be a merging of healthcare data with state public health surveillance data to help us understand what's going on. And the truth is, the hospitals they sort of have to give it to Epic and Cerner because of their contracts. Epic and Cerner are happy to give it to academics. They're happy for the academics to give it to the state, but they don't want to come directly to the state. And I'm actually okay with that. I think that's a good arrangement to have, where we can all play our particular role in building this network of quality data that can then drive the AI that is underneath it all.
I think we might just call it a day after that, unless there are any burning questions anywhere. Thank you so much, Commissioner Goldstein. Beautiful remarks.
Thank you.
All right, we are at that time of the day. I know you're sick of hearing from me, so we're gonna close down, and I cannot have thought about a more perfect way than the poignant and beautiful remarks that Commissioner Goldstein just ended us with. So let me just end with an invitation. All right, which camera do I look into? That one. Okay, awesome. Success of something like Beacon only happens when it's all of us, right? It's not just the Beacon team. It's not just public health departments. It's not just public health programs and researchers. It is astute clinicians. It is regular citizens that see signals in their communities. And so my invitation is to join the Beacon community. That's why it's open source. We're here to collaborate, and we look forward to hearing from you. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you for being here.